Well, this is BBC Wales on 2. Now, in a change to our advertised programme, Week In, Week Out discusses today's white paper on education in Wales.
Today, the government published the first ever white paper on education targeted...
But on this programme, dramatic new evidence which casts doubt on the convictions following the murder of Philip Saunders. Evidence which raises serious questions about the police operation launched in the hours following the attack with an urgent appeal for witnesses.
We are treating it very seriously, and we appeal to the members of the public, particularly those in this area who may have seen anything suspicious, let us know.
For 2 weeks in that October 1987, police combed the area and conducted house-to-house inquiries. They had a lead. A neighbour had spotted one man there at the time and gave a full description. South Wales Police circulated posters. Along with a picture of Philip Saunders, there was a description of the suspect, the only one to be seen with him when he was attacked. He was 6 foot tall with dark curly hair, and there was also a substantial reward. As the head of CID himself played the murder victim in a reconstruction of his last known movements, the hunt was on among his officers for this mystery suspect. In a massive police operation, dozens were interviewed in the hunt for the 6-foot man. The night after the murder, 2 teenagers had been arrested for stealing cars. 2 weeks later came the news they'd been arrested again with a third man. This time all 3 were charged with the murder of Philip Saunders. Darren Hall, 18, with a history of petty crime. Ellis Sherwood, also 18, another petty crook from Cardiff. And 19-year-old Michael O'Brien, also from Cardiff and with no criminal record. To this day, Ellis Sherwood and his friend Michael O'Brien have maintained their innocence, admitting they'd been breaking into cars that night, but not to being part of a murder. But at the trial in Cardiff Crown Court, almost a year later, the testimony of Darren Hall proved crucial. He said he'd been the lookout while the other 2 had committed the murder. Hall admitted manslaughter, but that was not accepted by the prosecution, and in court all 3 were found guilty of the murder of Philip Saunders.
Ellis Sherwood and Michael O'Brien, you have been found guilty of murder and robbery. A majority of the jury has decided, if I may say so, in my view, rightly decided as they have. Darren Hall, it is to be said in your favour that you have admitted participation in the killing of Saunders. The jury have convicted you of murder. The court is only able to pass one sentence. That is custody for life. Take them down.
From the maximum security Long Larton jail where he was kept, Michael O'Brien has been on hunger strikes to protest his innocence.
I can honestly say that myself, Darren Hall, Ellis Sherwood are all innocent. We're all innocent, and I have fought from day one to prove our innocence. Even Darren's as well, because there's no possible way that man done this murder. I hardly know Darren. I only met him by chance on the Monday, the night of the murder, and I've never ever committed a crime before this, i.e. the car. That was my first criminal offence.
This was a very unusual trial indeed. 3 defendants were accused of this murder, and 2 of them said all along that they had nothing to do with it at all, and they were nowhere near the scene of the crime, and that they were at all times in the company of the third. The third, Darren Hall, pleads guilty to being involved, though only a manslaughter, says he was present together with the others, and wrecks their alibi. His evidence and his plea of guilty to manslaughter and robbery must have dominated the trial and effectively destroyed the prospects of the other 2 defendants.
After the case, the judge and many onlookers believed justice had been done. The right men were behind bars for a particularly vicious murder. But on this programme, after more than a year of investigation, we disclose worrying new evidence that raises real doubts about that conviction. New facts that question whether the prosecution version of events can ever have happened. A new potential alibi has come forward that the jury never heard, and key prosecution witnesses say that they lied in court. In Darren Hall's statement to police, in which he confessed, he said he, Michael O'Brien and Ellis Sherwood left this address in Fairwater. He said he knew Philip Saunders' routine and had suggested the robbery, so the three then made their way to his home to lay in wait. Darren Hall peeled off to keep watch at the corner of the small group of houses where Mr. Saunders lived. As their victim arrived home, he made his way towards his back door. He turned to face his attacker. There was a scuffle, and using a spade nearby, he was struck on the head. Witnesses who heard and rushed to the scene soon afterwards were horrified at the sight that met them. They told police of what must have been a savage attack, which left blood spattered around the back of the house.
It was very dark. At first I thought he must have dropped a bottle on the floor and broken it, that this pool of liquid was the content on the floor. As my eyes became accustomed to light, I could see that he had at least 2 deep gashes to his head. This pool of liquid was in fact blood.
Darren Hall said that O'Brien and Sherwood had together attacked Mr. Saunders. O'Brien was alleged to have held him down. Surely they must have had his blood on them. Their clothes were taken away by police for forensic analysis. They'd not been washed since the night of the murder, yet no blood was found on them. We gave evidence from the scene of the murder, including photographs, to one of the country's top forensic scientists for his views. There was in fact no forensic evidence linking the three with the crime. John Hayward has 30 years' experience in forensic science. In this murder, he believed some blood would have remained on the assailant's clothes.
I would expect there to have been a spattering of blood spots in this case. I understand that there had been very heavy rain, so that the photographs don't, in fact, adequately show the full pattern of blood staining at the scene. But clearly there are still spots of blood present, and had it not rained, then there would have been much more.
So would this spattering have been on the assailant or assailants?
Yes, you would expect anyone standing within a few feet of this incident to be spattered with blood.
After the attack on Mr. Saunders, the prosecution pieced together the teenager's movements. Philip Saunders had been viciously beaten about the head. The time was 11:17. We know that from a call to the emergency services. The prosecution alleged that the three young men then split up.
Brent!
According to Darren Hall, the three teenagers then reformed here at St John's Crescent 20 minutes after the murder to divide up the money. Now, St John's Crescent is just a couple of hundred yards from Anstey Court. It would seem remarkable that they returned to a spot so near to the murder scene that it was swarming with police. But our research has uncovered something even more startling. The three teenagers then arrived here at two addresses in Fairwater Grove East. We've spoken to witnesses who give the time of their arrival. That time is 5 minutes after they were supposed to be dividing up the money in St John's Crescent. The distance between St John's Crescent and Fairwater Grove East is almost exactly 2 miles. So according to the chief prosecution witness, the three men had covered on foot 2 miles in 5 minutes after dividing up the money. Further, the jury never heard evidence of a potential alibi, a local government worker. After the killing of Philip Saunders, his two alleged attackers called at her house. They wanted to see their friend who was there, but the young man's mother was also in the house and confirms the time that they arrived.
I remember a knock on the door and Richard answered the door.
Do you remember the time?
Yes, I remember it very well. From the time that it happened, it was 22, quarter to 12, around that.
How can you be so sure now that that was the time?
Well, I don't have to dredge it up from my memory. You might recall that I had to give an account at the time, very close to the time that it actually happened, and I was able to recall what happened on that night by other events that occurred in our family home at that time. And I made a written and a verbal statement at that time, and the events of that night and also the subsequent weeks, I'm afraid they are imprinted on my memory.
There are other remarkable inconsistencies in Darren Hall's account of events. He said they stole the takings in a canvas bag Mr. Saunders used, which had £500 printed on it. When they met at the nearby church, it would have been from this bag that they divided up the money. But in statements to police at the time, Mr. Saunders' brother clearly says he had not carried a bag for his money. He kept the money in his pockets. This is confirmed in other witness statements, that Mr. Saunders did not carry a bag for his takings. His pockets would be bulging with cash. We took our new evidence to one of the country's top criminal barristers. Evidence for the successful appeal in the Carl Bridgewater case was prepared by Patrick O'Connor. He had no doubts of the importance of these new findings in this Cardiff case, facts that the jury never heard and which tonight are made public.
If there is material that for whatever reason, and the court should not be too strict about this, material which for whatever reason has not been placed before the jury, but which contributes to changing the picture and undermining the reliability of Darren Hall's evidence and of the guilt of these defendants, then it can, I'm sure, will be put together and submitted to the Home Office to persuade the Home Secretary this case should be referred back to the Court of Appeal.
Darren Hall's statements to police were riddled with inaccuracies. He changed his mind 10 times. After one confession he said, "It's all bullshit." But it was the evidence Hall gave in court that proved so compelling to the jury. He only admitted manslaughter, but stuck hard to the story that he was the lookout to a murder.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yet now, nearing the end of his prison term, he gives an altogether different account. We gained permission to talk to this convicted murderer. He has decided to tell publicly what he now claims is the truth. On the night of the murder, the three were out trying to break into cars, but none of them were involved in the murder of Philip Saunders. He says he's lived for 8 years with the knowledge that innocent men have been jailed for that crime.
All I can say is I'm sorry that it happened. I'm sorry that me being the person that I am has put those two in total pain, suffering. Should never have happened. So.
Are you a murderer?
No. Never killed anybody in my life, never hurt anybody in my life.
Have you ever been involved in any sort of crime like this, being a lookout to a murder?
Never. Neither of the other two.
The police questioning of Darren Hall took place over 3 days, often for long periods and into the night. Hall says he was allowed very little sleep, and in the end claims he said what he believed they wanted to hear.
I was continuously being interviewed. They came in, took me upstairs, cuffed me to a radiator. The radiator was on and it was hot. There was about 2 or 3 of them at a time throwing questions towards me. Then they took me back downstairs, and they brought me back up again, and then took me back downstairs, brought me back up again, and in the end I just sort of I had too much, and I just sat there and just slumped over the table, and I admitted to it.
But Hall is a complex character. After the final confession, he was held on remand for 8 months, plenty of time to change his mind, but by then he seemed to have grown into his role of the murderer.
I wanted to be somebody. I've always wanted to be somebody. I wanted to prove to somebody that I was clever, that I'm the big I am. And I stress, that's how I wanted to be, the big I am.
Why should we believe you now, when you've lied so often in the past?
I just want to set the record straight, basically. I just want, this is my way of explaining that I wanted something for myself. and not for the other two. I just wanted something for myself to prove that I am somebody. The other two were just people that I knew, or were just accidentally been dragged into it. It should never have been happened.
We asked a psychologist to see Darren Hall. She assessed him as someone who might be vulnerable in the context of a police interview, which might explain his initial confession. Afterwards, his actions followed another well-known pattern of behaviour.
When we're looking at why he maintained those admissions whilst he was on remand and at trial and subsequently in prison, then I think his behaviour more closely represents the behaviour of people who make voluntary false confessions. That is, people upon whom no pressure is placed to confess, but who actually choose to confess and sometimes maintain their guilt over many years. And those people are, or at least some people like that, are known to be people who have characteristics similar to Darren's. That is, they have low self-esteem. They're nobodies. Being convicted of a major crime makes them a somebody.
The prosecution case 9 years ago also included witnesses with criminal convictions who supported Darren Hall's confession. The police took statements from them that they'd overheard conversations involving two of the accused men, Ellis Sherwood and Michael O'Brien, which were highly incriminating. We've tracked down the key witnesses. They now say that what the court heard were lies and the three men may be innocent. Yet at the time the jury was told to consider carefully what they'd said in supporting Darren Hall's version of events.
Members of the jury, it is the duty of the judge to tell you what evidence is in law capable of amounting to corroboration. It is for you to decide whether it amounts to confirmation of what Hall says. I so direct you that it is open to you to find such corroborative evidence in the case of Sherwood and O'Brien in the testimony of the following witnesses. Christopher Chick.
So right.
Christopher Chick was pulled in by police and became, after Darren Hall, the most important prosecution witness. He gave statements that O'Brien and Sherwood had tried to enlist him in a robbery, boasted about it afterwards, even showed him the murder weapon. But at the trial he broke down, and what now follows is an exact record of what he told the court.
I ask you again, why have you told us 100 times it was true if it was not?
It's hard to say. Half the statement was put into my mouth. Half all the statements.
What are you saying, Mr. Chick?
The police made the statements. I was made to sign them because I was held over a barrel if I didn't turn Queen's evidence.
While he admitted most of what he said was lies, the court heard that some remained true. In particular, that Ellis Sherwood had tried to recruit him for the robbery. Today, though, Christopher Chick retracts all the statements that he made to police and in court at the time.
So why now? Why, after 8 years, have you decided to say this?
It's not after 8 years. I wanted to say this 8 hours after they got convicted, mate. I was trying to in that Crown Court, but no one wanted to listen. They wanted them 3 boys locked away. And look what they are today. You people probably never been in trouble in your life. To you, this is just water off a duck's back. To somebody like me, this could be my ass. This could put me in prison for a long time, speaking to that camera. But that's the risk I'm prepared to take. I'm not afraid of no one. And in my opinion, them boys should be freed now.
Clive Butcher.
Clive Butcher was an alcoholic, picked up off the streets, who knew Ellis Sherwood and testified that he'd heard him boasting of a robbery.
You've made quite incriminating comments in the statement about Ellis Sherwood, that he had a wad of money on him, that he was talking about a robbery.
That's a load of crap. I knew Ellis used to go to school, yeah, but kill anybody, no way. No way at all.
Why did you make this statement then?
Well, I was drunk.
You were an alcoholic at the time, were you?
Yeah, I took a few pills at the same time.
The court heard another witness, 16 at the time. claim he went to see a friend in Cardiff prison while Ellis Sherwood was also on remand there. Sherwood happened to be in the next-door cubicle, he told police, being visited by his sister Mandy Persigo. The witness said he heard Ellis Sherwood tell her about being part of the murder of Philip Saunders.
Is any of this statement that you made to police in February 1988 about overhearing this visit next door between Mandy Persigo and Ellis Sherwood true?
No.
And did the visit that you talked about originally in February 1988, did it take place at all?
It didn't take place.
So this statement that you gave to police and in court subsequently was false, was it?
It was false, yes.
Why should we believe you now, as a man who has a criminal past and criminal convictions behind him? Why should we believe that now you're telling the truth?
Why would I put myself up for a perjury charge if I'm lying again?
Catriona Morgan.
Another witness to give evidence, Catriona Morgan, also 16, and in social services care when she was picked up. But she was without a social worker when she told the police that Ellis Sherwood had said to her he had been in Anstey Court the night of the murder, something he always denied.
You never said that.
No.
Me, Michael and Darren went into Anstey Court to steal a car because you signed a statement to that effect.
He said that he was stealing cars, but he didn't say that he'd been to Anstey Court. No, he didn't.
But why would you have said this? Why would you have signed that statement then,
I don't
do you
remember
think?
saying it. I don't remember saying it at all. And in my statements, you know, that it's the policeman who was taking down the statements, it's his wording, like, and I was answering questions and things, you know, but it's his wording, and I don't remember saying that at all.
Were you confused?
Yeah, definitely confused. I mean, they were saying, you know, did Ellis ever say that he went to Anstey Court? No. Are you sure? Has he ever been there? No, I don't think he had, like. Well, did he know the area? Had he ever been there? I don't know. Maybe he did know the area. So you're saying that he could have been there? Well, you know, he might have. So you're saying that he could have gone there? Well, maybe he did. Maybe he has been there. I don't know, but he wasn't there on the night. You know, as far as I know, he was taking cars, like.
I mean, can you be absolutely sure to me that in that conversation, Ellis Sherwood never mentioned being in Anstey Court?
No, he didn't. And I'm willing to swear on my kids' lives, he didn't say that he'd been to Anstey Court.
One final piece of evidence supported the confession from Darren Hall that all three of them had been involved in the crime. When Ellis Sherwood and Michael O'Brien were taken down to the cells in the police station, the court was told that they started to talk to each other. The court heard that a senior police officer was there, Detective Inspector Stuart Lewis. He wrote down the conversation, and that fact was inserted into custody records. The conversation was highly incriminating. O'Brien, I can't hold out much longer. I will have to tell them the truth. Sherwood, don't do that. O'Brien, I can't hold out much longer. I might have to tell them what happened. Sherwood, you're talking about life. Keep your mouth shut. And later, if Hall hadn't grasped us, we wouldn't be here. Michael O'Brien and Ellis Sherwood have consistently denied this conversation ever took place. But if there are doubts about this murder conviction, then who might have committed such a terrible crime? Early on in the police investigation, they pulled in several members of a young gang who used to meet here at what was then Astley's Cafe, several yards away from Philip Saunders' kiosk. They discussed Mr. Saunders' movements and his routine, and what an easy target he'd make for a robbery. The kiosk where Mr. Saunders worked was in Cardiff Central bus station, which was at the time a well-known area for some of the city's gangs and small-time crooks. They all knew Philip Saunders. Initially, it was around these people that the police investigation had centred. Michael O'Brien and Ellis Sherwood had nothing to do with these gangs, but Darren Hall knew some of the men the police had been talking to.
Everybody at Anstey's who used to do what I was doing.
It's local cafe.
Yeah, the local cafe on the corner in the bus station. Everybody knew Philip Saunders. Everybody knew what he used to do. Everybody knew it. It could have been any one of them.
There was one witness to the scene immediately after the murder itself, a neighbour. As she looked down to see what was happening, she saw one man and gave police a good description of what she had seen.
Come and sit down.
The description was challenged at the time of the court case, but she has confirmed to us she stands by it.
As the voices got louder, the next thing I was aware of was a loud bang and a clatter. This man looked directly up at me. I saw a male person stumbling along the garden path towards the open rear gate. I believe this to be the same man that looked up at me. I remember this person had dark curly hair, he had a lot of it, and this man was wearing a dark blouse-on jacket and dark trousers. This person leaving the garden was of a similar height to Phil, and he appeared to be of a slight build.
The woman's evidence was strong enough for the police to set up a reconstruction with a tall, dark, curly-haired man playing the part of the murder suspect. He was filmed afterwards, running away from the scene. Yet the three men convicted were several inches shorter, and none had dark, curly hair. Crucially, the jury never heard statements given to police from local people who described seeing a similar-looking man on the night of the murder and in the weeks before. But that chief suspect for the murder of Philip Saunders was never found, and as a result of evidence we've passed to the Home Office, the case is now being examined as a potential miscarriage of justice.
There is plainly enough material here to investigate further, and for the Home Secretary to consider referring back to the Court of Appeal. There are legal rules about people appealing where they have pleaded guilty, and it's not easy. There will be quite a heavy burden, particularly on Darren Hall, to explain and justify the history of his conduct at this trial. We all recognise that, but that picture is emerging now, and it needs more development, but it looks very much as though there's going to be enough material to justify the Home Secretary referring it back.
Since his conviction, Michael O'Brien has moved from prison to prison. He's been on hunger strike more than once and says he's driven by the knowledge that he's an innocent man.
Even if I've got to spend the rest of my life in jail, I will fight this conviction. I'm not taking a rap for nobody, and there's somebody out there who's still free and has been free for 9 years, and he could still kill again. There's been two injustices done, one to the victims' families, and we've been made even more victims. The person has got to be caught.
Even if this will affect your parole and your eventual release?
Parole doesn't mean nothing to me. When you're innocent and you know you're innocent, you take nothing. Nothing whatsoever. Nothing more than my innocence established will ever do. And I know that's the same for the others now.
Over the years at Trial and Error, we've used the resources of television, money, time, people, to unearth new evidence when there's a danger that the innocent may have been wrongly convicted.
But there's one resource that we haven't yet tapped. That's you, the millions of people who watch our programmes.
So tonight we're asking if you can help us with an interactive first. We've established a special free phone line. We'll give you the number in just a moment. We brought our researchers to this special studio.
Because tonight we're asking you to turn detective and help find clues that could free the innocent. You could be the last chance for those that the system of justice has failed. People like Mark Cleary, who Trial and Error's research managed to rescue after serving 9 years for a murder of which he was innocent.
Words can't say anything about it, you know. A judge can turn around and say he's sorry. The police can turn around and say they're sorry. Oh, what's sorry? Sorry's nothing. Sorry's nothing to me. You know, I've lost everything. I've lost my job. I've lost my dignity, my respect. you know? And they're not going to get that back from me.
Thank you very much for calling.
That's a case where the evidence of ordinary people, unheard at the original trial but investigated by trial and error, proved in the barrister's words to be absolutely vital. And that's why we've decided to take the unique step of asking you to help us by calling in about any of the cases we'll be telling you about over the next half hour.
We've got a special free telephone number tonight. It's 0800 146 481. That's 0800 146 481. And a bank of researchers waiting to talk to you if you've got some special piece of knowledge that can help us. But you don't have to call us by phone. You can also fax us, and that number is 0171 242 3346. And you can also email us on trialanderror@channel4.com. Please do call with details about the specific cases that are coming up, but also we'll take your calls about any miscarriage of justice that you would like to tell us about. In this special programme, we'll be asking for your help with a number of worrying convictions.
First, there's Bob Field. He's serving a life sentence for killing his common-law wife, Helena Howard, in 1994.
Tim Robson was convicted of murder. After 2 trials, an appeal and a retrial, he may yet be innocent.
Susan May is another person convicted of a family killing. An appeal against her conviction for murdering her elderly aunt, Hilda Marchbank, failed last February. We'll be asking for your help to establish whether or not a burglary took place in the Marchbanks' house that night.
And later on in the programme, we'll be asking you to put faces to a string of names. They're people that we're desperate to contact.
Now, we're not saying in all the cases we're bringing to you tonight that the convictions are unsound. We have an open mind. All we can say is that in each case there is good evidence to support the prisoner's claim that a miscarriage of justice might have occurred. Our job, and we hope yours at this point, is to try to find the evidence to prove it.
You may well be asking, what if your evidence goes the other way? Well, your evidence, like much of our research, may very well prove that the prisoner is indeed guilty and deserves to be where they are, which is behind bars. We count that as a result. It helps us filter out the time wasters so that we can concentrate on the truly deserving cases.
The first case we'd like your help on tonight is the conviction of Bob Field for the murder of his wife Helena in December 1994. And just to remind you, that was the day that Britain's tabloid press were beginning a frantic search for Britain's first big lottery winner, a publicity-shy Asian factory worker.
The body of the woman found in the ditch at Simmons Bath was too decomposed to give a visual identification. But a lengthy post-mortem last night confirmed police suspicions. The body found on Monday is definitely that of missing call girl Helena June Howard.
This is where Helena's body was found, in a drainage ditch in the middle of Exmoor, just 3 months after her husband reported her missing and made this apparently heartfelt appeal.
I've been getting more and more worried. I think something must have happened as she would have contacted us. You know, and she's not the sort of person that would just go off and vanish.
According to the prosecution, this was just a heartless charade. Just a few weeks after that broadcast, Bob Field was arrested and charged with murder. It hadn't been a conventional relationship. Bob Field was the manager of a McDonald's in Barnstaple, Devon, a well-educated, mild-mannered man in his early 40s. Helena, the woman he loved, was a working prostitute. Field said he last saw Helena alive when he fell asleep with her in the bedroom of the family house here. The police say he murdered her here, opened up the garage, took out the car, opened the boot, put the body in it, and drove her up to the moor and dumped her in the ditch. If he did, of course, he's a killer. But if Helena was alive after December the 14th, when Field is completely alibied, then he's a wrongly convicted, innocent widower. And this man is sure that he saw Helena alive leaving the family home alone that night. What can you remember of that night, the night of the 13th and 14th of December 1994?
I was standing in the doorway over there, right where I lived, at the back of the entrance, right, and I saw this maid walking down through, which proceed past me onto the link road up towards Bedford.
Even though it was the middle of the night, you knew exactly who she was?
Yeah, I knew who she was straight off. Not by name, but just by, just by what she looks like. As she went past the roundabout onto your left towards Biddyford, a lorry with Christian written over the top went up through at the same time as she disappeared.
So if we could find the lorry, we would have an independent confirmation that you saw those two things, the woman and the lorry at the same time.
That's right.
Yeah. At trial, the prosecution were dismissive of the evidence of what they called an insomniac dustman. But if we could find that lorry, it would confirm the story. We reckoned the most likely lorry Mr. Jeffries remembered was one of the Christian Salveson fleet. Just like the police, we looked through the records at this depot. We found key records the police had overlooked. They'd been filed out of their proper order, but they weren't conclusive.
So do you know any firms whose livery includes the word Christian or something similar? Or perhaps you were driving a lorry in the Barnstable area, driving out along the A361. Mr. Jeffries said he saw Helena walking out of the estate towards the roundabout at 2 o'clock in the morning. She may have been wearing tracksuit bottoms and a dark Barber jacket. Neither the lorry nor the driver are implicated in any way, but they hold the proof that Helena was alive when the dustman saw her that night.
Which would make Bob Field an innocent man. This is Helena, and we have more evidence that she was alive long after Bob Field reported her missing. Other prostitutes who had worked with her in the past remember seeing her, along with her jealous and violent pimp, after the prosecution say she must have been killed by Bob Field. If just one person out there remembers seeing Helena alive after December the 14th, 1994, you could help us end the injustice of a man who may be wrongly convicted of his wife's murder. Fee, I can hear the telephones have been going. What have we got coming in?
Well, David, as you can see, it is already extremely busy. We've had a lot of calls since we've been on air. I'll just run through the numbers for you again. It's 0800 146 481. That's a free phone number. And you will talk to the researchers here in the strictest of confidence. The fax number is 0171 242 3346. And our email address is trialanderror@channel4.com. David.
When we've established there are grounds for concern, the police are often asked to reinvestigate the case. But we're concerned that their investigations aren't always as neutral as we could hope.
Usually when an outside police force is drafted in to re-examine the case, we get a positive result. If the same police force reopens one of its own cases, effectively marking its own homework, things are often very different.
Take the case of Brian Parsons. Parsons was convicted of the murder of an elderly lady in Devon after he came forward to help the police by saying he was in the area at the time. Time was at the heart of the case. The intruders had cut the electricity and phone wires. BT technology helped the police establish when the phone had been cut, so helping to fix the time of the attack. But BT later admitted they'd got the time wrong by 24 hours, and that put the crime at a time when Parsons would have been completely alibied. What's more, trial and error's analysis of the electricity meter, which had been read just a few days before the murder, came to exactly the same conclusion. That electricity had been in use hours after the time when, according to the police, the wires had been cut. Again, pointing to Parsons' innocence, though this is something the police still dispute. In Bristol, we tracked down a small-time crook who gave us some fascinating information. He used to work with a couple of other local villains called Meeker and Lewis. One of them had confessed to him that they were responsible for the burglary and for the attack which killed Ivy Batten. As a result of our programme, the Devon and Cornwall police said they'd investigate. They proudly displayed the results of the work they'd done, but while local television was invited to film the outside of the volumes, what's inside, what's important, has been harder to get at. When the Devon and Cornwall publicised that they had done all this research, that wasn't the end of the story for you, was it?
No, because they didn't give us all the material which they supplied to the Home Office.
You were asking for it?
We've asked repeatedly for it.
And they were saying?
It just didn't arrive. It was going to be left to the Home Office, it was going to be left to the police. Whatever the answer, we didn't get it.
What did you get in the end?
Well, eventually we got something which has opened up the case fully. They've sent us a further statement of another person to whom our suspect has confessed the killing.
So this is Mika?
That's right.
This is Mika, who we know has already confessed to one man that he was involved in the Ivy Batten murder, and now he's confessed to somebody else.
Someone else who the police have seen, have statements from, they've even got it on tape. It's so important. The Home Office was saying, no, you can't go back to the appeal. He's confessed to one person, it's not corroborated. It's now corroborated, and they know it, and the police have known it for ages.
But not thought it necessary to disclose?
You would find it hard to imagine any reason that would excuse this non-disclosure.
Because this is a man who's now said to two people, I committed the murder.
That's right, and a man that they arrested initially for committing the murder.
In support of Trial and Error's campaign to open the files on the case of Brian Parsons, there have been demands by MPs that an outside police force investigate the Parsons case and the Devon and Cornwall Police's handling of it.
To another case now where we believe the police may have investigated the wrong person and where your help could prove critical. Again, it's a case of murder.
This is Royton near Rochdale in Lancashire. Hilda Marchbank, an elderly lady, lived alone here in 1992 at 24 Tandle Hill Road. Her niece Susan May lived nearby and visited her on a daily basis to look after her. On March the 12th, 1992, at 9:30 in the morning, Susan May came round to number 24. Her aunt was dead. She had apparently been beaten and smothered. We know from internal police documents that Susan May was not a prime suspect at first, but after 3 weeks of fruitless inquiries, they eventually charged her with her aunt's murder. Almost indiscernible bloodstains on the walls of her aunt's bedroom and a fingerprint provided the evidence to convict her.
Our analysis of the chemically enhanced stains, only one is definitely blood, and fingerprint of Susan May, who regularly came in to look after her aunt, leaves question marks over the conviction. But if it wasn't Susan May, who was it? There were signs of a burglary, which the police were to maintain was bogus, something May had arranged to cover her murderer's tracks. Yet there were unexplained footprints inside and outside the house. And there was evidence not followed through by the police that there had been suspicious goings-on outside the house.
There was a police incident, caravan set up. I decided that I would report a suspicious vehicle that I'd seen in the early hours of the morning of the incident. It became apparent during conversation with the officers there that there had been a murder. I described a vehicle that I'd seen approximately something like 12:40 to 1 o'clock in the morning, just after the sports coverage had finished on TV, and I'd heard a vehicle approaching in the direction of my property, which was Woodland Park, which is off Tandle Hill Road.
We drove the distance from 24 Tandle Hill Road to where Mr. Williams lived. The suspicious car that he saw in Woodlands Park that night was less than 500 metres from where Hilda Marchbank would be found murdered the following morning.
I saw that it was a dark metallic red, possibly a V or a W registration, old style. There were 3 occupants that I can recall. The passenger actually looked straight at me as the vehicle drove past.
And Mr. Williams's sighting of that red car was backed up by Hilda's next-door neighbour, who heard exactly the same thing. A car, possibly with a slipping clutch, burgundy or plum red. He thought it might be a Fiesta. There were 3 people in that car.
What were they doing? Could they have been the burglars? We know there was a pattern of burglaries on old people in the area. So can anyone, a solicitor, a policeman, even a villain, tell us what they know about a gang using a red car to burgle houses in the Rochdale Oldham area? Those who believe in the innocence of Susan May say this may be her last chance of justice.
And perhaps the person who believes that most strongly is Chris Ross. Chris, you were Susan's lover, and the case was that she just murdered her elderly aunt. You know the woman better than anyone else. Could that have happened?
No, not possible.
Why do you say that?
Susan's the most mild-mannered person I've ever met. She wasn't a nasty, violent person at all.
We don't snap.
No, I've never seen her snap. I've never seen her lose her temper.
I mean, the case built up by the prosecution was that she was systematically milking her aunt of the family funds for your sake, mostly to spend on you. Does that fit in anything you recognise at all?
No, not at all. In actual fact, during the trial, the financial aspects were disputed and overthrown. It's just never been the case.
But that's the great folklore that there is, that she was ripping off, and yet she had power of attorney over her aunt's money.
She had power of attorney for a number of years. She could have put her aunt into a home and sold the house, no problem. She didn't need to murder for money.
What does she say about those bloody fingerprints?
Well, the fingerprints, there is blood on the wall, and Susan's fingerprints are on the wall, but not in Susan's. There's no blood in Susan's fingerprint. But the house, I mean, she went up 3 or 4 times a day, must be filled with her fingerprints.
And she was doing DIY as well, I gather, and you know,
she used to do everything for Aunt. Yeah.
Very briefly, and finally, I mean, you've seen Susan quite recently. How does she feel? Does she think this nightmare is ever going to come to an end for her?
She always thinks it will. She always thinks something will turn up, the truth will come out. Yeah, she remains positive despite being inside for 4 years now.
Chris Ross, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All the time, but you know, the good cases.
Well, we're still very busy over here, as you can see, lots of calls coming in. We've had some very interesting ones with people suggesting possible different other truck companies with the word Christian in their title. And also, we've had a call about a case in Leicester that the trial and error team have already been looking at. So obviously we'll be following that one up too. So just to give you an update on the numbers, 0800 146 481 is the free phone number, 0800 146 481. Now, the vast majority of the people who fall foul of the law, whether rightly or wrongly, are not people that you'd choose to spend much time with. Take Tony Dickinson, a heavy drinker who's doing life for killing 2 of his drinking pals in a fire which took place in a flat on the 9th floor of this tower block in Leeds in July 1990. He says the fire was an accident, and certainly much of his subsequent behaviour was directed towards getting help. Now, we believe that what we've discovered about the circumstances surrounding this fire will demolish the case against Dickinson, but we're still unable to trace some vital witnesses in this case.
Their names are Sheena Gill-Martin and Paul Elliott, and we know that Dickinson spoke to them shortly after the fire. Now, the fire was in the Bermentofts area of Leeds in July 1990, but Gill-Martin and Elliott were living at the time in the Acomb area of York.
If you know where they are now, please urge them to get in touch. Their evidence, added to what we've already discovered, could be vital to a man's innocence.
And it's innocence, not just legal technicalities, that we're interested in. And innocence relies on hard evidence from people who may be able to shed new light on a case. Often, many years have gone by and people have moved on, so we need your help in tracing them.
These are just some of the people we're trying to contact, together with where they were last heard of. Now, we must stress that none of these people have done anything wrong, but they may have vital evidence which could help to establish someone's innocence, or even confirm that they were rightly convicted. And as we say, they may not even be aware that they hold that knowledge. Any calls you make to us will be treated in the strictest confidence, and you can be sure that anyone we contact will be approached with all possible discretion, and only if we think that they do have evidence which could put right a genuine miscarriage of justice.
So if you know anything about the whereabouts of any of these people, please get in touch. The telephone number is 0800 146 481. That's 0800 146 481. And the phones will be manned until midnight tonight, and then again all day tomorrow. And of course, you can always fax us on 0171 242 3346 or email us at trialanderror@channel4.com.
If you'd like to know anything about past editions of Trial and Error, you'll find the full programme scripts and an update on what's happened since on the Trial and Error page, which you can find on Channel 4's website, which is at www.channel4.com. Our page is called Trial Frame, that's all one word, and it is easy to get to.
It's no accident that most trial and error cases involve murder. In most serious professional crime, the police have pretty good underworld intelligence, but murder is usually an amateur's crime. The police don't have the usual leads to follow, which means the scope for mistake is greater.
We believe there may have been a terrible mistake in the case of Tim Robson, a deaf man convicted of the murder of a close friend, Suzanne Greenhill, with whom he'd had a sexual relationship. Now, we don't need to go over all the questions that have arisen over this evidence, but there's one matter someone may be able to help us with. Robson had scratch marks on his face. The victim had no traces of skin or blood beneath her fingernails. Robson said he'd got the scratches during a fight in a pub.
we're in Newport, Gwent. On the evening of Tuesday, June the 28th, 1988, Robson said he was drunk and got thrown out of the Sovereign Bar here in the town centre. As a result of a scuffle with two men, he was chased out of the area, through and out of the bus depot, and all the way down the Cardiff Road. When he got to the Bellevue roundabout, just past the Royal Gwent Hospital, he escaped his pursuers by climbing onto a bus shelter and running off into the park to hide.
You'd have to have a ridiculously sharp memory to remember what happened on a summer night 9 years ago. But there is something you'd remember about Tim Robson. He is profoundly deaf. So does anyone remember a fracas in a pub involving a deaf man who was worse the wear for drink? And of course we'd be grateful for anyone else who can remember seeing the victim alive after that Tuesday night.
This is the village green at Chipperfield, near Hemel Hempstead in Hertfordshire. It was in the woods here 4 years ago that a local woman was the victim of a terrible attack at gunpoint and left for dead. She'd been sitting here by the pond smoking a cigarette when she was seized and marched off into the undergrowth. The young man found guilty of this attack, Joseph Roach, had owned a distinctive air pistol.
It's a Viroc 45 like this one. Roach said someone had stolen it from him the day before the attack. The jury clearly didn't believe him, believing instead that having used it in the attack, he threw it away.
So imagine our surprise when we learnt that last December an identical weapon was found here just yards away from where the victim had been found 4 years ago. What's more, it was found by the very same woman who had originally stumbled upon the battered victim all that time ago. The gun was in near perfect condition and looked almost as if it had been left here for someone to find. In which case, Joseph Roach didn't leave it here. Joseph Roach has been in prison these past 4 years. So was the gun stolen, as Joseph Roach has always maintained, or has someone else been looking after this gun all the 3 years since he was convicted? And if so, why?
Okay, well, that's very good of you. Thanks.
Well, as you can see, still very busy here in the studio. Please don't think that just after we go off air, there is no need to call us. Our phone lines will be open until midnight tonight, and again from 9:30 until 6 o'clock tomorrow. So the number that you need is 0800 146, 146 481. That's 0800 146 481.
Yeah. There's any number of programmes on television appealing to you to help solve crime. And I suppose, in a sense, this is just another one. Because when someone's wrongly convicted, it means a crime is still unsolved and the true offender goes free. There's a case in point on Thursday at 9 o'clock, the case of Danny McNamee, the first of 2 trial and error investigations. That's this Thursday at 9 here on 4. From Fee and me, good night.
You're always working to get fit.
To stay.
Whitemore High Security Jail. One of the men caught on camera allegedly trying to escape, Danny McNamee, convicted as the Hyde Park bomber. But last week given new hope of freedom. For reasons you're about to see, his case was referred to the Court of Appeal. The jury that convicted McNamee never heard evidence that key police officers and prosecution witnesses must have known. Evidence that someone else made the Hyde Park bomb. We know who that person was, and it wasn't Danny McNamee. Queen's Guard had set off from its barracks a little late. So the step was purposeful as they made their way through Hyde Park to the palace. It was the 20th of July 1982. The time was 10:44.
The first bomb went off a few hundred yards from the Household Cavalry Barracks in Hyde Park. It had been left in a blue Austin Morris, one of a row of cars parked illegally just off Hyde Park corner. The bomb contained between 5 and 10 pounds of high explosive. The effect of the explosion was devastating.
Four soldiers were killed. And people remember Hyde Park for the horses. "15 months had gone by since the Hyde Park blast, and the trail was cold. Sheer luck gave the anti-terrorist squad their breakthrough. In woodland countryside near Pangbourne on the Thames, 30 miles west of London, estate workers stumbled across a treasure trove of evidence.
And as we were turning back, I noticed a piece of plastic. As I kicked it with my foot, it stayed still, and I thought, this is unusual. As I cleared the soil away to reveal the wording, "No hot ashes."
There was a dustbin there, clearly.
Clearly a dustbin. We lifted it up, and to discover explosives. A lot of silver paper like this, and newspaper, unusual electrical items. Very strange indeed.
What made you think they were explosives?
Well, the smell. It was the smell of it, the almond smell.
It was an IRA arms dump. Buried in two bins eventually uncovered at the Pangbourne Arms Cache were guns, that sweet-smelling plastic explosive, and all the lethal electronics needed to trigger it. 3 months later, there was another break. Special Branch had been tracking the movements of an IRA cell active on the mainland. The police stalked them to another wood, Salsey Forest, in Northamptonshire. The group slipped through their fingers, but the police did manage to retrieve what they'd left, another buried hoard of terrorist equipment. They were eventually arrested and, on the evidence of the arms dumps, convicted of conspiracy to cause explosions.
The Republican movement have always had a philosophy of striking a British mainland, going back to the Fenians in the last century. And that body of ideas was accelerated during the course of the war when they discovered that casualties in Ireland were not making news. And the rationale was twofold. One, revenge, to strike at the people who they regard as being responsible for what was happening in their own streets in Belfast area and elsewhere. And the second was the cost-benefit analysis that a bomb in London was worth 20 dead Irish people in Ireland.
One of those bombs was discovered in Phillimore Gardens in West London. An alert passerby became suspicious of an abandoned holdall. He called the police. A bomb inside the holdall was blown up in a controlled explosion. The debris, including Duracell batteries which powered the detonator, was painstakingly gathered and reassembled for forensic examination. As for the contents of the dumps uncovered in the woods at Pangbourne and Salsey, the experts had not been idle. The police had a lot to go on, as they examined the airtight boxes containing a lethal assortment of bomb-making equipment. It included the electronics to receive a radio signal and circuit boards to amplify it, apparently to trigger an explosion. There were 85 fingerprints from various hands found on the items. One lone print, unconnected to any of the others on a piece of sticky insulating tape, was to prove particularly significant. But it was 2 years before experts matched this one print to a man called Danny McNamee, and his name rang alarm bells. McNamee had worked at an electronics factory south of the border where the owner had strong Republican connections, and he'd been arrested some years earlier over some circuit boards. Wrongly as it turned out, and no charges were proceeded with, but McNamee's name was already in the system. On August the 16th, 1986, 2 days after the fingerprint match was made, soldiers of the Royal Anglian Regiment burst into his flat. It was 20 to midnight. McNamee lived just a few doorways from the massive security fort which dominates his small hometown of Crossmaglen.
I mean, it was the normal thing for any young fella around the area that would picked up at random, you know. The first time you heard about it, you worried yourself sick. The next thing you were out, you know, when it happened a few times, you sort of got used to it and you thought, well, you know, shortly he'll be home. You didn't sort of blow it out of proportion. It was just a general thing happened in the area.
So what was your reaction the night that he was actually picked up?
Well, he was getting married and it was so near the date and I couldn't believe it. And I thought, oh, well, he'll be out in the morning, you know. I didn't really panic. And then when we heard that he was in Paddington Green Police Station, it was unbelievable. Couldn't believe it. Just couldn't believe that he was going to be charged with something, you know.
Nearly every IRA suspect has been held here at Paddington Green Police Station, but at this stage the grounds for suspecting McNamee are slender. Just one smudged print on some sticky tape found in one of the forest arms dumps. But now the investigation acquires a sudden new momentum. Another print found on sticky tape from the second secret dump is found to match the suspect. And a third fingerprint on a Duracell battery from that controlled explosion in West London is apparently that of Danny McNamee. Bomb debris was brought to Woolwich Arsenal, then the headquarters of RADI, the Royal Armaments Research Development Establishment. And here, scientists made a further discovery, this time linking McNamee to the Hyde Park bombing 4 years before his arrest. They compared a circuit board buried in Salsey Forest with 2 fragments of a circuit board found after the Hyde Park bomb. They looked like the work of the same man. And on the basis of the one print found on tape at the same dump, that man must be McNamee. Yet the Crown didn't bring up the Hyde Park dimension until 15 months after McNamee's arrest. The original charge had been conspiring with those other men tracked down to the arms dumps in the woods sometime during 1983 and 84. But the Hyde Park bomb had gone off in 1982, a full year earlier. Just 10 days before the trial, the Crown backdated the charge to include 1982 and the Hyde Park bomb.
Traffic around the Old Bailey was brought to a standstill as McNamee arrived in an armoured security van from Wandsworth Prison.
McNamee's trial took place at a time of intense IRA activity on the mainland.
Anti-terrorist squad officers had spent the past 3 days checking every courtroom for explosives. Today, every person entering court number 2 was given a thorough body search.
A devastating and sinister portrait of Gilbert Thomas Patrick McNamee began to emerge. Danny, as he was known to his friends, was presented as the scientific mastermind behind the bombing campaign. The press claimed that he had been sponsored through university by the IRA to emerge as a specialist bomb maker. Up to 90 killings were laid at his door. The actual charge against McNamee was not of bombing, but of conspiring to cause explosions. Lawyers have mixed feelings about conspiracy. For the defense, it can be a vague, general charge difficult to disprove, but it has distinct advantages for the prosecution.
When they're not sure of the particular roles that people have played,
but they feel convinced that they have been involved in criminal activity, then they use the conspiracy rather than the substantive offence. If they take the view that the evidence shows that this person, for example, is a bomb maker on a large scale, then one substantive charge wouldn't really reflect the gravity of his role. And therefore the conspiracy charge, assuming there are other persons involved, is one which would reflect the overall gravity of the offence.
It's a matter of fact and of legal disgrace that the trials of some Irish terrorist suspects have been tainted by slur, prejudice and innuendo. The trial of Danny McNamee was no exception. The prosecution, without any evidence, implied that certain experts called by the defence had been paid for with IRA money. And in his summing up, many in court felt that the judge skated over important evidence for the defence while introducing conjecture and speculation of his own, which even the prosecution hadn't advanced. But there was another judge in court that day. The second one had come from America to observe the trial for the McNamee family. We asked Judge Andrew Summers to return to the legal heart of London to give us his professional opinion of the way the case was handled.
When Mr. McNamee testified on a direct examination, every time he said something, the judge would find it difficult to understand what he said, and he would interrupt and he'd said, excuse me, what did you say? When cross-examination by the prosecution started, either the judge's hearing got better or Mr. McNamee's accent got better, because the judge understood everything. Now, this is subtle, because a trial is a performance. A trial is a delivery of messages. And when the defendant gets on the stand, he has a train of thought in which he's trying to convey certain thoughts to the jury. And then you interrupt that train of thought. You are, in effect, interrupting his defense.
The Crown set out to prove McNamee a master bomb maker. 2 prints on the tape at the dumps were enough to link him to the electronics found there. A circuit board at the dump looked like the fragment from Hyde Park, seemingly linking him to that bomb too. Alan Faraday, an arms research expert from Radi, maintained that the workmanship on each was identical and designed with only one lethal purpose in mind.
An amplifier to interconnect between the receiver and the decoder in an IRA radio-controlled device. That constitutes a radio-controlled bomb, my lord. No other pattern could produce the same result. It was specifically designed and constructed for that purpose.
The whole trial appeared to me to be built on a house built on cards, that each card was delicately placed one upon the other, and in the legal language, you had inference upon inference upon inference, but very little substance. And so you had all these little cards pushed up in order to convict this man, and very little substance.
And at the heart of the rickety structure was expert evidence about the fingerprint on the battery from the bomb in the holdall at Phillimore Gardens.
I lifted it with a piece of adhesive tape and took possession of it.
Then, once you had the fingerprints of McNamee, did you compare that?
Yes, I did.
With the result?
I found it identical with the left thumb.
Danny McNamee has always denied being a bomber. He was constantly using insulating tape in his work. The 2 fingerprints could be explained by someone else using a role he had innocently handled. But although the Crown agreed that many of the 85 prints from the arms dumps were from innocent hands, they said that 2 of McNamee's branded him a bomber. To those who've spent years studying the IRA, like Tim Pat Coogan, who wrote the seminal book on the organisation, the McNamee case is striking and rather unusual.
There's no question as far as the IRA are concerned that McNamee is not in the IRA, is not involved. Any astute observer from outside could tell that for themselves. He's never acknowledged as a volunteer in any commemorative function. He's never mentioned any list of prisoners. And these are all marks of high honour to the Republicans. And when somebody is not included on them, you can be quite sure there's a good reason. As I say, when you approached me for this programme, I checked up on him. and they know not the man.
Well, the papers had a field day after he was convicted, and they named my brothers as being IRA men. I think they said they were on the run. I mean, it was ridiculous.
And you decided to sue?
My brothers decided to sue, yeah.
And what happened?
They won the libel action against the Daily Mirror.
So
it was totally untrue.
So you regard being described as having any connections with the IRA as a libel, as a smear, as something that...
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
This wasn't a diplock court, shortcut justice, where witnesses give evidence from behind a curtain and where people are tried without a jury. The trial of Danny McNamee unfolded in front of an Old Bailey jury, ranks of eminent QCs, the full grand panoply of British justice. It was a great piece of theatre, and in one key respect, a major piece of fiction. You see, the police and the prosecution knew that another man had already been charged with making devices virtually identical to those found in the woods and at Hyde Park. What's more, they knew that this man had been found guilty and was actually in prison. Go to the Northern Irish town of Crossmaglen and you'll find a place with the usual preoccupations of any small town. The people here are church-going, a little traditional if anything. They shop, they gossip, they complain about the weather and the fortunes of the local football club.
What are we now doing?
You could be mistaken for thinking this was a small grey town like a score of others in the United Kingdom. You could be mistaken, and you would be. Look down the side roads, examine the streets, and you realize that you're in the front line of a battlefield 300 years wide. History has placed Crossmaglen on a peninsula of Ulster, virtually surrounded by the Republic. Not much more than its postcode is Northern Irish. In heart, passions, and politics, Crossmaglen lies on the Republic side of the divide. This is the capital of what the security forces call bandit country. The snipers of Crossmaglen have made their share of army widows. Danny McNamee was one of 7 children. His mother died of pleurisy when he was 8, and the Troubles didn't leave the family untouched. In 1974, his father was badly injured when a bomb exploded at McArdle's pub in Crossmaglen. He died some months later. The IRA themselves had murdered 2 of Danny McNamee's cousins, who they accused of being police informers.
My idea of the McNamee family, and I taught some of them, is that they were a quiet, decent, hard-working family. Some of them went to grammar school and went on such as Danny, went to university. Some of them, another brother has a business in town, and they have the reputation of being a hard-working, quiet family who kept to themselves and mixed with their friends, and they mixed with their friends and neighbours, as everybody does in Crossmaglen. But the reputation was nothing other than that.
I'd say we were not much different than anybody about here. We're sort of we knew what the situation was and what situation was going on and that, and by and large there was no more politics among us than what we were worried about was getting on from day to day and getting by, and that was basically it, you know.
As far as sending a man like that living beside an army post who was well documented to London to carry out bombing, it would be impossible. It would be like sending in somebody who'd been appearing regularly on the 9 o'clock news. It's not the way terrorist organisations operate. The fact that you live in Crossmaglen would automatically make you suspect, because Crossmaglen, as you know from looking at the map, was looped in at the time of partition into the 6 counties, whereas in fact it's a strongly Gaelic nationalist area. Resented it from day one, had a strong history of smuggling, and then as the Troubles wore on became such a hotbed of the IRA that it could only be serviced from the air by the Royal Air Force. if it were left to the IUC and the Army, the Cross-McGlen would have been lopped off the 6 counties during the last 25 years.
It was because of an incident across the border, an errand in the Irish town of Dundalk, and a meeting in the town's Imperial Hotel, that McNamee first came to police attention. In 1984, his boss at the electronics factory had asked him to pick up and pay for some circuit boards from a local supplier, Donald Moyner.
Ah, Donald.
But circuit boards can be used in bombs. McNamee and Moyner were arrested by the Irish police under the Explosive Substances Act.
Basically, the defence was that the circuit boards related to the creation and installation of an anti-theft device in poker machines in a fun fair in Dundalk area, and to eventually Mr. Moyner brought one of these poker machines, or I think it was a poker machine it was called, not a fruit machine, and showed how the machine worked normally as it was manufactured, and how one could cheat the machine as it was manufactured, and then showed, after the installation of his device using his circuit board, how you could forestall the cheating. And he actually demonstrated with the machine in court.
So this fruit machine, poker machine, one-armed bandit is actually brought into court?
It was brought into court with, I don't know who carried it in. I remember it was in the afternoon of the last day of the trial.
And the judge is satisfied after this demonstration that this circuit board is not an explosive substance, but is a...
They were satisfied that the circuit board was used for the reason that Mr. Moyner said it was used, for a perfectly lawful and explainable and innocent reason.
So that's how his prints enter the whole system then?
Well, his prints would have been available to the Irish police after that arrest. I can't say what happened to them, but they certainly would have been available to be taken, and I'm sure they were taken.
In fact, in the spring of 1984, that set of fingerprints was passed to the British Special Branch, which again routinely passed the prints on to Scotland Yard, where they sit for 2 years. They sit here during the discovery of the Pangbourne arms dump, where, the jury were told, there was a single fingerprint of Danny McNamee. They sit here after the controlled explosion at Phillimore Gardens, where apparently there was another of his prints. And they sit here on file, on computer, when the second Woodland arms dump is discovered, again, as the jury were told, with a third McNamee fingerprint. For 2 years, until just 48 hours before his actual arrest, no one matches any of the 3 fingerprints to the set of McNamee's prints held on file here. Peter Swan is a fingerprint expert of world renown. That 2-year delay puzzles him.
It's certainly an extremely long time from the receipt of the marks, or the developed marks on which they would work on, and certainly the length of time that it would have taken to make the 2 identifications on the tapes wouldn't have been very long. I mean, the marks are quite clear.
But there are other question marks over the prints themselves. The one found at Pangbourne was discovered on red tape wrapped round a makeshift encoder. The single print, supposedly of McNamee, was among 5 from other people on this device alone. But at trial, in spite of the painstaking attention to detail you might expect for such a central exhibit, no one could say precisely where on the tape the print had been located. Can you understand why it should be that they can't actually tell which piece it was on?
No, I can't. When a tape is removed, obviously a note is made of what part is coming from the particular part of the tin. So at the end of the day, when one needs to state where the mark is, then you can do so.
Would you like to go into a witness box and be asked by counsel, where was this mark, and not be able to give an answer?
Indeed not. No, I wouldn't. An expert should be able to answer the questions, particularly of a matter that he's concerned with.
The fingerprint found at the second arms dump in Salsea Forest is also something of a puzzle. It was one of 6 fingerprints of various people found on a piece of equipment in the cache. One of these fingerprints was said to be on grey tape attaching 2 circuit boards to a piece of plywood. But once again, there's no photograph at this crucial stage of dismantling the device. In fact, none of the photographs show any grey tape at all, only black. Now, underneath the black tape, there was meant to be some grey tape with supposedly one of McNamee's fingerprints on it. What questions arise there for you?
Well, the sequence of removing the tape from the item, different shots, photographs should have been taken at the time. Obviously, the removal of the black tape, whether all in one piece or in different pieces, a shot would be taken of that. And then, presumably, underneath the black tape, which we can't see, is the grey tape. And I would have thought that another photograph would have been taken to show the position of that grey tape on the particular item.
Because the worrying thing is that there's nothing to say that there actually is any grey tape underneath that black tape, is there?
Well, you certainly can't see any from that particular photograph, no.
It's always puzzled me why there should be just one single fingerprint on the tape. I mean, if I take a piece of tape, perhaps I could ask you to tie those two things together with the tape. How easy is it to do that, leaving just one fingerprint? Oh, hang on, you left one now, okay.
Well, it isn't easy. In fact, if you're doing it with no precaution, it's very, very difficult indeed not to leave more than one fingerprint.
On the other hand, if one of McNamee's colleagues picked up a roll of tape that McNamee had used, what would he have? He would have, what have they got? One print of McNamee. Is that a scenario that you find plausible?
Well, yes, I mean, if he's handled it on some previous occasion, then certainly his fingerprint could well be there, and then subsequently used by, as you say, someone else.
But when we come to the print on the Duracell battery, an extraordinary story emerges. At trial, the prosecution produced expert and at that stage unchallenged evidence. McNamee's thumb was said to have 17 characteristics in common with the print on the battery.
Well, in my opinion, the majority of the markings are simply not positive characteristics. Characteristics 1 and 14, which are clearly marked on here, which is a short independent ridge, roughly parallel between an upper and a lower ridge. And look at what is marked on the battery mark at 1 and 14. We have a mark going from an upper ridge to a lower ridge, sort of a diagonal direction. But the point is, that same kind of marking we find here, here.
So these might not be ridges at all, they might be sort of scrapes of something or of a brush or something completely different.
Indeed, correct.
From a layman's point of view, I mean, I can see that in that one there's clearly a loop. There doesn't need to be any sort of loop at all there.
Indeed not. If we look at the lowest characteristic mark, which is number 9, and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ridges intervening between that, and what we have here is the innermost recurving loop forming the terminus, the inner terminus of the pattern. It's a loop pattern going to the left. If we look at the same characteristic mark number 9 here and count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we don't come to anything like that or representing that particular loop pattern. So all that with its associated characteristics is missing from here. The characteristics are so vague, so indefinite, lacking in positivity, that the mark is bordering on no value. That means it's no good at all, and therefore to make an identification from something so vague as this, with all the imperfections which I've pointed out, you can't do that.
When McNamee's case came up for appeal, that fingerprint was at the heart of an astonishing and now notorious storm of professional controversy. Peter Swan was brought in by the defence to challenge this evidence, along with another expert, a Mr. Waghorn.
Well, before the appeal started, I had spoken with Mr. Waghorn, and he agreed with my findings, and obviously I agreed with his. He gave evidence, and at some juncture in the court hearing, this particular chart was produced, and an adjournment was held, and Mr. Waghorn had to assess this by himself. On resumption, he said that he simply agreed with everything that was marked on the chart, and therefore he agreed that the mark was identical and was that of Mr. McNamee.
So the expert who's been there to say that it wasn't McNamee's fingerprint is confronted with this evidence. There's an adjournment, we don't know what happens. Then he comes back and he's completely changed his testimony. He says, yes, I'm convinced that is McNamee's.
Correct, yes.
What was the impact of this turnaround?
Well, the defence team's comment was that they were shell-shocked. That was the word they used.
The defence couldn't call two experts who disagreed with one another, so the evidence of Peter Swan that the fingerprint was not that of Danny McNamee was never heard by the appeal court. Mr. Waghorn turned down our invitation to explain his change of mind. Dismissing the appeal, the judges were particularly scathing on the subject of this battery fingerprint. The collapse of that point, they said, was symptomatic of the whole appeal. Most fingerprint experts today could tell the judges that they were wrong.
Well, I am aware that it has been examined by many fingerprint experts, and I am also aware that their findings agree with mine, and that they're amazed, I suppose is the word, that any identification could have been made from it. No one that I've spoken to, or no one that I've heard who's passed an opinion about it, has come to any other conclusion than mine, that the mark is literally of no value.
Have you ever known one print cause so much anxiety?
Not in my experience, no. No, I haven't. Not in this country, certainly not.
And that's an experience of how many years?
I'm now in my 40th year.
And there's been no other print that has caused so much anxiety?
No.
But what about some of those other fingerprints found at the IRA's secret arms dumps in the woods? There were more than 80 of them at Pangbourne alone, and they weren't McNamee's. So whose were they? Trial and Error can now disclose that 4 years before the trial of Danny McNamee, police experts knew very well who many of those fingerprints belonged to. And it's a major disgrace of this conviction that this man's identity was never revealed to Danny McNamee's defense.
The explosion was devastating. 2 soldiers killed along with 7 horses, some of them shot to end their agony. The injured included civilians, to kill as many of them as possible. They were just 8 feet from the car when the bomb was
The Hyde Park bomb has a particular place in the canon of terrorist violence. The killing by remote control of soldiers on ceremonial duty stretched the IRA's definition of legitimate military targets in the course of an armed struggle.
They began to collect the deadly 4- and 6-inch nails which had been sent flying over hundreds of yards.
When you're looking for clues after an incident like that, I mean, what sort of detail do you go into? How meticulous is the search? I mean, suppose we were looking at this piece of ground here now.
Right. You would expect people to be going through and doing what amounts to a fingertip search. The ground wouldn't be this bare.
No, but if we were doing a fingertip search, I mean, it would be literally fingertip, is it?
Yes.
And we'd be picking out what kind of stuff?
Well, not that. Cigarette end, maybe. Bottle top, possibly.
Yeah.
Whatever shouldn't be here, and is here now. I mean, the grass, the leaves, no, but it didn't come here by itself. So what's it doing here now? Not my job to sort out why. Put it in the bag, let somebody worry about it later.
And that would be one of the things that was heaped into the 61 dustbins that were gathered.
And 5 packages.
And 5 packages.
And 3 motor cars.
Yeah. Intensive as it was, this search failed to uncover what was eventually to be a key piece of evidence against McNamee. A fragment of circuit board turned up about a week later. What the searchers combing the cordoned-off area had missed was picked up, along with other material, just yards away from the explosion by a woman who happened to be passing. Not a policeman, not a soldier, but a passerby comes across something that has escaped all their notice.
Either they missed it, or it was blown by the explosion up in the air and settled in maybe that large tree there. It'd be logical.
And just sort of stuck there for 7 days?
And stayed there until the winds took it out.
It is, though, let us put it no higher than this, a very odd chain of events.
It's an anomaly. It's something that doesn't fit.
There's another mystery about this fragment. Other objects found in the debris were tested for explosive traces, yet this vital fragment inexplicably wasn't tested. Testing which could have confirmed it as coming from that explosion or ruled it out. We have traced the woman credited with finding the Hyde Park fragment. She lives in sheltered accommodation and has problems remembering things. Certainly she has absolutely no recollection of being in Hyde Park, let alone finding or handing in the fragment. We've asked to see her original handwritten signed statement. Puzzlingly, the authorities tell us it cannot now be found. We went back across the Irish Sea to look for more fruitful leads in Dublin. Because there were other questions over those circuit boards found at the dumps and in Hyde Park. The distinctive expert work, it was claimed, of McNamee, the IRA's graduate in terror. In Dublin City University, we discussed the case with an electronics expert who was also familiar with the McNamee case.
The circuit board evidence was presented as being the smoking gun in the case, but of course it was nothing of the kind. Basically, the standard of construction is very poor. I think if we look at these photographs, I can illustrate the point. This is the rear of the board, and anyone with experience in soldering would say that has not been well put together. That has been quite badly assembled. From the component side, the other side of the board, I think we can see even more clearly that this is really a bit of a mess. We have components here not aligned with one another. We have components jumping over one another, which is precisely the kind of thing that the appropriate tracking is supposed to avoid happening. Right? So this is a real botched job. This is a real crudely put together. And in fact, in this particular instance, one of the components is connected the wrong way around, so this component wouldn't actually function correctly due to bad construction.
So are you, in a sense, arguing things the other way around, that McNamee, with his skill as a physics graduate and having worked in electronics, would be exactly the kind of person not to make a job like that?
Well, I would expect someone who was experienced in this kind of work to do an awful lot better than this.
At trial, the Crown's chief electronics expert was this man, Alan Faraday. He's given evidence about Lockerbie and the SAS shootings in Gibraltar, yet according to Mike Scott, who has opposed him in court, his qualifications are somewhat meagre.
Alan Faraday's top academic qualification is a higher national certificate. I think a lot of technicians out there watching this would be rather surprised to know that someone with such a qualification can achieve such a position of importance.
If the prosecution had wanted a more qualified expert, could they have found 10 experts more qualified?
Absolutely no shortage.
100 more experts?
Thousands.
At the trial of Danny McNamee, it was Mr. Faraday who testified that the circuit board fragments from Hyde Park and those found at Pangbourne and Salsey were constructed specifically for bomb-making purposes. Was that something that you could say with confidence was specifically designed for the sinister intent of bomb-making, as the prosecution claimed?
Well, of course not. To take that amplifier board in isolation, take it out of the context in which it was admittedly found in Salsey and Pangbourne, take it out of that context, and you've got a completely innocuous piece of electronics. The prosecution's case that this board was specifically designed and constructed that anyone dealing with this board and anyone involved with this board was involved in a bomb-making procedure, that is nonsense, because that just isn't so. Nonetheless, that's the impression that was successfully conveyed to the judge and to the jury.
This doesn't match the theory of the IRA recruiting a specialist like McNamee. It was something I was anxious to discuss with Mr. Faraday, but he declined our repeated invitations to meet. Meanwhile, the puzzle over the circuit boards took us north, back across the border. If anyone could shed further light on the mechanics of bomb-making, it would be those who have been in the front line of the troubles. The Northern Ireland Forensic Science Agency has unmatched experience of things explosive. After 10,000 explosions over the past 25 years, you'd expect nothing less. The service's work made it a priority target, and in 1992 it was itself blown up. This scientific expert, for his own safety, prefers neither his face nor voice to be identified. He's in the front line of counter-terrorism. We showed him first a picture of the circuit board found in the forest dump at Salsey, where one McNamee fingerprint had been found on electrical tape.
The board itself is a piece of glass fibre that has a series of copper track patterns on the reverse. I have seen similar boards in Northern Ireland from approximately 13 incidents with an identical pattern to this. And these are part of an amplifier circuit board, which is used in conjunction with other components in a radio control explosive device.
A familiar and common pattern then. And not only, we learnt, in Northern Ireland. because remarkably similar boards, we learnt from our expert, had been found in Dublin. This, for instance, found in a raid at the Dublin home of a known IRA bomber called Desi Ellis. We asked our expert to compare the Ellis board with the board buried in Salsey Forest, because, to us, the two looked remarkably alike.
The circuit layout is identical. It has a series of copper track lines. The lines and pads are in the same arrangement, and again would compare with the 13 other cases I've previously mentioned. Because of the photographic process involved in manufacturing these circuit boards, I can say that both of those boards would have been evolved from the same original drawing.
How would you compare the standard of workmanship on those two boards?
It would appear that a similar standard of workmanship on soldering was present on both boards.
So that would be consistent with both boards being the handiwork of the same man?
Either the same person or somebody else with the same skills.
Who then is Desi Ellis? One thing trial and error can at last disclose is that Ellis's fingerprints were all over one of the Woodlands Arms finds. Another is that Ellis was caught red-handed 15 years ago with more than 30 long-delay timers, incendiary devices, circuit boards, receivers and encoders. Ellis was sentenced back in 1983 to 10 years in an Irish jail. But in 1990, in an unusual and well-publicised development, he was extradited to Britain. Scotland Yard had matched Ellis to fingerprints on the arms cache at Pangbourne.
Then an RAF jet with police on board took off with the first IRA suspect ever to be extradited from the Irish Republic to mainland Britain.
Ellis was flown to Britain, but he was acquitted. Not because he hadn't been involved in making bombs, but because he had. The jury decided that the evidence had already been used to convict him at his trial in Dublin, and he couldn't be tried and sentenced twice for the same offence. Experts from this laboratory gave evidence both at Ellis's Dublin and his London trial. They know Ellis's handiwork well, and they've told us that it's identical to the design and workmanship on the board found at Salsey, the board at the dump where one McNamee print was found. But if that's the case, what about the fragments of circuit board found in Hyde Park? The layout, execution and design also seem identical. But of course we're not experts. But this man is.
The fragments in Hyde Park have those features on them which identify them as amplifier boards of the same type as was found in the forest and in Dublin.
Of the same type, but in terms of the layout?
The layout is identical. The features that are present on the two fragments, the features that are still existing, are identical to those parts of the intact boards.
So they would seem to have a common parentage in terms of layout?
They would have. They would have been manufactured from the same original artwork or drawing which was made to produce all of these boards.
It was this information that sent us back across the border again to Dublin. The experts in the north had told us that the Hyde Park circuitry was identical to that found in the possession of Desi Ellis. Only one man could confirm that, and that was Ellis himself. The man who knows the truth about Danny McNamee's conviction, the man we believe actually made the mechanisms at the heart of the bombs McNamee was accused of making, now makes a living mending televisions. This is a picture of a circuit board that was found at Salsey. It didn't actually have your fingerprints on it.
That's right.
One. Do you recognise that as your handiwork?
Well, that's similar to the one that was found in Dublin. There was, I think, about 5 of those found when I was originally arrested and charged with possession of these in Dublin.
Well, let me help your memory. Here's one of the ones that were found in Dublin, which you were arrested for. Is the handiwork similar? Is it identical?
It is identical. It's identical as far as I can see in every aspect.
So you made those boards?
Well, the boards, as I say, would often come, and the components would be put on separate.
So you put on the
I
components?
actually handled well, I think it's fairly clear from the Pamburn dump that my fingerprints were on a number of items in that.
Why did you let your fingerprints get on it, if I may ask?
Well, it was just one of those things. These at the time, the particular gloves that were in question were of a surgical type glove, and the handling of tape actually tore them, and one got careless then in that situation.
So it was difficult assembling these things with the gloves on?
With that particular type of glove, yes.
Can I take you to the one found at Hyde Park now? Of course it's in pieces. Is any of that familiar to you?
Well, it looks very familiar to the two that you previously had shown me. Certainly the characteristics of what's remaining there look fairly similar.
So might it be a reasonable assumption that whoever made those boards made the same boards that you were arrested in possession of in Dublin?
That could be an assumption, yes.
A reasonable assumption?
Well, it could be, yes, a reasonable assumption.
And therefore a reasonable assumption that the same as the ones found in Selsey, in both the Woodlands arms dumps, including, of course, the one which had your fingerprints all over it?
Well, they certainly look very similar.
We've shown that there's not a scrap of evidence that Danny McNamee was a master bomb maker. Somebody else made the Hyde Park bomb. We've discovered that the fingerprint on the Duracell battery in the Holdall bomb was not, after all, that of Danny McNamee. As for the two other single fingerprints found at each of the Woodlands arms dumps and linked after an inexplicable delay of more than 2 years to Danny McNamee, it is, shall we say, far from certain how they got there. Danny McNamee was convicted of conspiracy to cause explosions. It takes notoriously little evidence to get a conspiracy conviction, but in all justice, there has to be something. But the most disturbing aspect of the McNamee case is that much of this evidence won't be news to the authorities. Vital evidence wasn't disclosed to the defense, even at McNamee's appeal. Ellis's involvement as a bomb maker was known years before McNamee's trial. McNamee was convicted of a conspiracy going back to 1982. But the boards, which we now know were the work of Ellis, must have been made by Ellis before 1981, the year he was arrested. McNamee wasn't the master bomb maker. The master bomb maker was already behind bars. The defense didn't know that, and experience shows they should have been told.
It all flows from the miscarriage of justice cases of the past, the ones that we all know, the Judith Ward, the Birmingham 6, Guildford 4, and other cases, that the problem has always been the failure to make full and adequate disclosure. And that has been a problem. And so in the recent case of Winston Brown, Lord Steen again reiterated what is now so well known. The right of an accused to a fair trial is a basic and a fundamental right. An accused's right to a fair disclosure is an inseparable part of his right to a fair trial.
The Troubles, if they achieved nothing else, at least blew apart the complacent myth of British judicial infallibility. Many innocent people were convicted as IRA terrorists, and the reluctance to accept these mistakes forever tarnished the career of the Lord Chief Justice of the time. Lord Lane also presided over and dismissed the appeal of Danny McNamee, a final Irish case which may yet come back to haunt him. For last week, in its very first ruling, the Independent Criminal Cases Review Commission, after viewing this programme, sent McNamee's case back to the Court of Appeal. things in life that take meticulous planning. And there are some things in death that call for the same infinite capacity for taking pains. People who are about to commit suicide go to extraordinary lengths to ensure a death that's neat, tidy, with no loose ends. Mind you, that can be true of murderers as well. On the 4th of June 1992, the body of Paula Guilfoyle was found in the garage of the home she shared with her husband Eddie at Upton in the Wirral Peninsula. Death was by hanging. There were no signs of a struggle. Paula was 33. She was also 8.5 months pregnant with their first child.
Well, I got the shock of my life, to be honest with you. As I opened the door and looked round, I could see Paula hanging inside here.
What can you remember of that?
Well, it was such a shock at the time that it was one of those situations, although I've seen plenty of incidences in my career, when it becomes a member of your own family, it's far, far different than it would be, you know. And I took basically what was a quick look, and I shut the door again.
Can you recall what Eddie's reaction was to hearing the news? Presumably he had been dreading.
I was, in fact, when the news was broken to Eddie, I was outside with the policeman who was here by that time, and we could hear him crying. He was wailing at the top of his voice. It was dreadful, it was.
Police Sergeant Caddick knew Paula Guilfoyle and her husband Eddie well. He was married to Eddie's sister, Sue. Suicide, as ever, left bewilderment in its wake. Why did she do it? A woman with so much to live for.
I say vivacious is the way. I know, I don't know what meaning vivacious, but she was always on the go. She was always laughing. I say she wasn't like a quiet person. I mean, I class myself as a bit quiet, but Paula was totally the opposite. I say you'd have to know Paula really, you know, to know the type of person she was.
Can you imagine Paula taking her own life?
No, you just can't.
Paula worshipped Eddie, but after 3 years the marriage was under strain. There was trouble with the in-laws. Eddie didn't always get on with Paula's father, and Paula didn't like Eddie's father, Norman, at all.
I mean, Paula used to have fixed ideas, and you accepted Paula the way she was, or you didn't. And if you didn't, well, you'd waste time being there, wouldn't it? She was that type of person. You accept what... It's like a package. You see what you get. If you like it, you buy it. If you don't like it, end of it.
The Wirral is a very particular part of England, a spit of land in two minds about its identity. It lies just across the Mersey from Liverpool, where the old industries may have died, but where the city still lives on its wits. Paula and Eddie started their life together in Wallasey, at the Wirral end of the Mersey Tunnel. But Paula wasn't the kind of girl to live in the shadow of the chemical works for very long. The Wirral also looks south to the cushioned hills and comfortable prosperity of Cheshire. This was the Wirral to which Paula aspired. That ambition seemed fulfilled when the couple bought and began to do up a house at Grafton Drive in the pleasant village of Upton. And by the autumn of 1991, the couple had something else to plan for. Paula was pregnant. Eddie was doing the decorating with his father. Much to Paula's annoyance, he remained under the influence of the blunt and domineering Norman. Paula's standards were exacting. She was a perfectionist. Everything had to be just so. And she said she would live at her parents' home until it was.
Anything she had in the house had to be matching, had to be colour coordinated. She was like that with the house. She was like that with her own appearance. If she wore a particular dress, the earrings, the beads around her neck, the shoes, the handbags, the coats, everything had to colour coordinate. She was just, I would say, in my opinion, obsessed with coordinating things in the house and about the way the house looked.
Well, it struck her as if there was something not right. There was something odd. All the tins she bought tins of soup, which were all together, all in lines in the cupboard, all in rows. Next to them were peas, next to them were carrots, all the labels facing the right way, just like you would see in a supermarket.
The couple were beginning to grow apart, in more ways than one. Eddie was spending more and more nights alone among the paint pots and the polycell. By day, he worked as a theatre assistant at a nearby private hospital. It was during this time, living apart from his wife, that he took up with a woman at work. He told Paula if she wouldn't move into the new house, Sandra would. Paula's reaction was immediate. She told Sandra to get out of Eddie's life and moved into the unfinished house at Grafton Drive. If it was a strategy to get Paula to come home, it worked. But could Paula ever trust her husband again? For Eddie was apparently still keen on Sandra. He sent her a birthday card. He sent her a Valentine card. And 2 months before Paula's death, he showed her a sensational letter. It had been written by Paula and seemed to be an admission that she had betrayed him.
I'm having to write it down on paper, as I can't tell you face to face. The baby I'm carrying is not yours. I've been having an affair for the last 14 months with a guy called Nigel. The baby is his. Hopefully, by the weekend, I'll be out of your life for good, and I'll be starting my new life with Nigel.
Now, there's no doubt that Paula Guilfoyle wrote this letter. Whether it's true or not is another matter entirely. No one could think of any Nigel in Paula's life, but Nigel might have been a fantasy. Nigel might have been a false name. Nigel might have been Paula's way of getting back at Eddie for his apparent infatuation with Sandra. Nigel might be her desperate stratagem to try to win back the attention of her husband at a time of her maximum vulnerability. But whichever way you look at it, the Nigel letter seems the outpouring of a troubled soul. Because of their shift work, the couple would leave notes for each other in an exercise book. Although later DNA testing established the baby was his, Eddie seemed to accept that it wasn't, and that their marriage was over.
True, there is no love left between us. But then again, there is no hate. We are parting on good terms, and that can only be good for us both as we start to rebuild our lives. You with Nigel and the baby, and me on my own.
At first, it seemed a sad and simple story.
I'm off now, love.
However strained the marriage, the day Paula died seemed to begin normally enough. Eddie Guilfoyle set off to his work at the hospital sometime just after 11. Paula had an antenatal appointment at 2, but she would not attend it. Instead, she unlocked the garage, left the keys as usual neatly under the front doormat, went back to the garage to climb an aluminium stepladder and hang herself from the central beam of the roof. Eddie would come back at 4:30, read the first few lines of a note she'd left, then go to his parents' house to wait for his father and his advice. he didn't think to look in the garage, where Paula's body was already growing cold. It was a textbook suicide. No police photographs were taken. At post-mortem, the rope round Paula's neck was thrown away. And there was that note.
Dear Eddie, I've decided to put an end to everything. And in doing so, ended a chapter in my life that I can't face up to any longer. I don't want to have this baby that I'm carrying.
Everyone agreed it was just one of those tragic things. Well, not quite everyone. Within 2 or 3 days of Paula's death, the old family animosities began to emerge from the sorrow that both families shared. And friends of Paula's went to the police and to the coroner with strange stories of things Paula had told them about those letters. Things which, if they were to be believed, added an element of the mysterious and the sinister to this sad story. Paula worked on the production line at the biggest local factory, Champions. The canteen was the opportunity for intimate gossip. The latest sexual shortcomings of husbands and lovers was a constant and reliable topic. But Paula was proud of her Eddie, and he told her he was doing a special project at work. It was something Eddie had first mentioned at a dinner party several months earlier, where he talked about getting some extra qualifications to help him rise beyond his somewhat lowly job at the hospital. But one aspect of this project, she told friends, was worrying her. He'd asked her to write him out some disturbing letters about suicide.
Paula said, I got a bit worried last night. Eddie had me writing suicide notes out. He said it was for a project in work.
Yet there was no such project at the hospital.
Yes, he was a Walter Mitty character and tended sometimes to exaggerate what he had done in the past.
Eddie's boss in the operating theatre was Joyce Preston.
His exploits in the Falklands, obviously, you know, I would imagine from what I gathered he was a stretcher bearer, but you'd have thought he was a paramedic on some of the things. At the time Eddie was employed, we didn't have a specific training course, but the government had set up National Vocational Training, NVQs, but it wouldn't have involved Eddie because there was quite a number of staff who were in front of him that would have had the opportunity before him.
So any talk of there being a suicide project, that would be out of the question?
Yes, because all courses that were undertaken by the hospital, it was relevant to the job that you were doing. And I can't imagine that would be relevant to working in an operating theatre.
For the police, a routine suicide had now become a suspicious death. When they tested some of the letters and paperwork at Grafton Drive, they looked at what seemed an ordinary set of household accounts, starting in April. Using the ESDA technique, they found impressions of another suicide letter, the original of which has never been found. Expert evidence seemed to suggest that the impressions had been made before the April accounts were written. As far as the police were concerned, that had to be suspicious, because it meant that this additional suicide note must have been written 2 months before she died. But most damning of all, a police search of the garage 2 weeks later revealed an apparently vital piece of evidence. There were no signs of a struggle, so Guilfoyle must have tricked Paula into colluding in her own death, persuading her to put her head through a noose, all in the name of the fictitious suicide course, and then yanking her feet out from under her. You see, in the garage, the police found another piece of rope, a tangled bundle with what they decided had to be a practice noose. The police must have known that because of a chance visitor, Guilfoyle had only minutes to murder his wife. Morning.
I'm carrying out a survey on wine.
Mrs. Brannan does door-to-door market research.
Could you spare me about 12 minutes?
Yes, sure.
Right, thank you very much. Do you ever buy...
She says she spoke to Eddie and Paula after 11 o'clock. How long does this questionnaire take?
About a quarter of an hour.
And you can be quite sure that you saw her at some stage between 11 and 12. And you would have said goodbye to her, therefore, after the interview. 11:15, 20 past 11.
20 past, yes.
Yet Eddie was seen at work, an 8-minute drive away, by 11:30. Everyone agreed, from the state of Paula's body, that she was dead by early afternoon, before Eddie came back. She'd failed to keep a number of afternoon appointments. People who called at the house noticed that an upstairs window was open and that the porch door was left unlocked, something that Paula would never do if she was out. But it was what happened after Eddie came back from work that stoked police suspicions. Paula had a sideline running a mail order catalogue at work. That day, the agent came by the house to deliver a parcel. She timed her visit at 5:30. She says she bumped into Eddie in the drive and he signed for the parcel in Paula's name. But Eddie had said this never happened. He'd gone off to his parents in a panic at 5:20, only coming back just after 6, and he said he'd never met the lady with the parcel. Yet this neighbour also said she'd seen Guilfoyle outside his house at about 5:30.
He sort of went back and forwards and then went off straight down the road. It was just after 5:30.
You sure it was Eddie in the car?
It was definitely Eddie in the car.
What sort of car was it?
A Rover, Red Rover.
It's quite familiar to you.
Yes.
Then. Was there some guilty reason that made Guilfoyle revisit his home? The relevant documents don't bear out the story that he signed for any parcel, but do we believe he didn't know what had happened in the garage? We know that Guilfoyle tells lies, but his parents insist that at 5:30 he wasn't at Grafton Drive. He was in their front room 3 miles away in a desperate state.
He sat down and he put his head in his hands and I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Paul has left me." So I said, "What do you mean left you?" He said, "She left me a note and she's gone." So he said, "What time is my dad coming in?" So I said, "About 5:30. So he said, "Well, I'll wait for my dad. I'll see my dad. Get some advice off my dad."
And I read the first couple of lines and I said to him, "Well, what we'll do, we'll go up to your house now and we'll ring round our friends and we'll find out where Paula is." And that's what we did.
It's hard to believe that having been told that his wife is missing, has gone, has left him, he just comes round here, sits here for an hour and does nothing.
You find it hard to believe that he would come to his mum?
Eddie Guilfoyle has always maintained his innocence of murdering the wife he said he loved. At trial, the judge wouldn't allow the jury to hear those friends of Paula who said she had told them Eddie was making her write suicide notes, on the grounds that it was hearsay. The truth of it couldn't properly be tested. But the jury still had enough to find him guilty of murder. It's a plot which seems to come from the wilder shores of detective fiction, the perfect murder, even to the extent that the killer makes his victim his unwitting accomplice. The alternative, that a troubled woman took her own life, seems prosaic in comparison. But what is the fiction and what is the truth? And why, as trial and error will show, did the Merseyside police and the Court of Appeal get the two things so fatally muddled?
RT Sport. It talks your language. Don't pay £30 for travel insurance when you book your holiday. General Accident Direct could halve that to under £15, leaving you more money for those holiday essentials.
The Magnet half-price summer sale is now on, and if you think that's tempting, just wait until you see our kitchens. Magnet, food for thought.
New
Michelin Energy. Better grip, safer driving.
Cats already enjoy Felix. Come on, don't let your cat miss out.
Saving money makes me happy. Insurance made me happy. Getting me home after an accident made me happy. Yes, I'm happy. A car insurance costs less than I thought.
Call direct on 0800 444 777.
La pendule fait tic-tac, tic-tic. Les oiseaux du lac pic-pac, pic-pic. Glou, glou, glou font tous les dindons. Et la jolie cloche ding-ding-dong. Mais boum, quand notre cœur fait boum, tout avec lui dit boum. Et c'est l'amour qui s'éveille. Boum, il chante Loving Bloom au rythme de ce boum qui redit boum à l'oreille. Boum, l'astre du jour fait boum, tout avec lui dit boum quand notre cœur fait boum boum.
Why are they in such a hurry?
When the packages they carry could often be sent in seconds by ISDN.
Why do we use so much paper?
When the paperless office is quicker and more efficient.
And why do they do that every day?
When mobile manager systems could make the journey unnecessary. Why not change the way we work? For a guide to how you could take advantage of communications technology, call BT on 0800 800 800.
High on the moors where Lancashire and Yorkshire meet, lives a man with intimate experience of injustice and the struggle to put it right. Eddie Guilfoyle's solicitor, Campbell Malone, brought eventual triumph to the tragedies which unjustly convicted Stefan Kishko and Kevin Callan for murders they did not commit.
Well, they all seem to start with a flawed police investigation, where, for better or worse, the officers involved pick on an idea of what's happened and remain tunnel visioned about it, and exclude anything that doesn't fit in with that theory. But I'm a lawyer. I work in the system, and the system has let Eddie down at every stage. And I feel that personally. I feel embarrassed that the system has worked so badly in this case. I think it's worked even worse in this case than the other cases that you've talked about. At every stage, it's been defective.
Eddie Guilfoyle is either one of the most wicked men in Britain, or he's one of the most wronged, having lost a wife, a baby, and his own liberty. If Eddie Guilfoyle did kill his wife in the garage of their home, he'd have made a grim bit of criminal history.
It'd be unique, because although people do get murdered by hanging, they've got to be either incapacitated by drink or drugs, or forcibly restrained physically. There should be bruises or scratches on the arms, or maybe the hands would be tied together. There'd be signs of a struggle. I mean, no one wants to be voluntarily hanged, for God's sake. I've never seen a case, a proven case, in the 40 years that I've been doing this job.
Signor Calvi had fled to England.
The only comparable case is the mystery surrounding Roberto Calvi, the Italian banker found suspended beneath Blackfriars Bridge in 1982. His death is known to have involved international Freemasonry, political corruption at the highest level, a banking scandal, and the Vatican, resources somewhat beyond Eddie Guilfoyle, a washer-up of surgical instruments from the Wirral. But once the police started investigating, they were single-minded in their conviction that Paula's death must be murder. How do we know this? Well, the Merseyside police investigation was so shoddy, idle, and just plain wrong that they were themselves investigated by another police force, Lancashire. And Lancashire's report to the Police Complaints Authority uncovered a keystone comedy of errors.
The basic procedures weren't followed. Basic inquiries weren't done. I've seen the paperwork. I'm well used to reading files in criminal cases, you know. I've seen how the Crown prosecution work. And in this case, you read a statement, it mentions something, you look for the second statement to back that up, and it's just not there.
The Merseyside team set out, and they videoed the experiments, to see if a woman the same size as Paula could have thrown the rope over the beam.
I am.
But the experiment showed that she could.
What's it?
Next, they went outside the inquiry team and brought in a policewoman in the same stage of pregnancy as Paula. She could too, but they convinced themselves it would have been extremely difficult for Paula to have managed on her own. There are moments that border on black comedy when the coroner's officer pulls too hard on a key exhibit, the actual rope left behind when Paula was cut down. When the two officers who cut down the body demonstrate how Paula's legs were touching the ladder steps, attempts at verisimilitude seem to have been abandoned completely. The dummy they use is almost a foot shorter than Paula.
But you're agreed.
The police were trying to establish that Paula couldn't have reached to knot the rope so high up on the beam here in the garage. But any expert would have told them that, whatever Paula's height, that wouldn't have been a problem. All they needed to do, like ourselves, was to ask the right questions.
The first thing to remember is that the police reconstruction appeared to use only part of the rope. So it makes it much easier if you have a longer piece of rope. The length of rope enables you to do more things, a bit more flexible. Secondly, most of the reconstruction was around trying to tuck a tail end through. But in fact, if you use the loop of the rope, it gives you a bit more stiffness. And of course, with the length of rope, you're able to do this quite much easier. But also, perhaps the knot wasn't tied high up, but was tied low down like this. In fact, so taking some of the stretch out of the go. But then when the strain was put on the thing, it moved up to the side.
But perhaps the most serious of the police shortcomings in this case was the matter of the so-called practice noose. Imagine the impact on the jury of hearing that the Merseyside police had found a second noose in that fatal garage. And imagine the impact on the jury if they'd known that a later police inquiry would cast serious doubt over whether that second noose was ever there at all. The facts are these. The garage was searched on June the 8th, 4 days after Paula's death, when doubts about it had arisen. An officer from a specialist search team conducted a thorough examination. He is sure he saw no rope in any drawer. Yet some 2 weeks later, on the 23rd of June, an unnamed officer had a discussion with the forensic scientist, Philip Ridyard, about the possibility of finding other significant items, such as other ropes. Later that same day, police found the so-called noose in the drawer. The drawer where the specialist searching it a fortnight earlier had found nothing suspicious.
One of the court officials sort of took it to the jury, handed it to the jury, and was running the noose sort of up and down the rope itself. And I think at that point I realised that the jury were going to find him guilty.
The copy of the PCA report which Trial and Error has seen is not a complete one. Any opinions the PCA investigators have made have been removed. We know that the PCA team believes that the belated discovery of the rope beggared belief. And beggaring belief still further is an error by the Merseyside murder squad which could have given their suspect the perfect alibi. And yet Merseyside police ignored a statement from a witness who said that she saw Paula Guilfoyle here, alive and well, an hour after the very last opportunity that Eddie Guilfoyle would have had to kill her. Remember, Eddie is alibied at work from 11:30 onwards. But at 20-1, Paula was seen, alive and apparently well, by this woman, Maureen Piper. She knew Paula well, and she says she bumped into her at this post office in Morton, a short bus ride from her home. It's next door to the antenatal clinic, where Paula was due at 2, an appointment she never kept. It was a chance meeting Maureen Piper discussed with friends when she heard of Paula's death next day. The murder squad decided to discount this evidence. The court was kept in ignorance of this sighting of Paula because of a simple bungle. When the investigating officer followed up Maureen Piper's statement, he went to the wrong post office. He went to Upton instead of the one in Morton, a mile and a half away, where Piper says she saw Paula. With nothing to back up Piper's statement, the police decided to scrub it. The scale of the bungle was made public in a local television programme. The Police Complaints Authority expressed severe misgivings over evidence which had convicted the hospital orderly. Various facts emerged during the course of a meticulous re-examination of facts which we considered, if they had been presented to the jury, might have led them to reach a different verdict. We invited Merseyside Police to respond to criticisms of their inquiry. They say they cannot assist us because of the further allegations now being made against them. But what about the second suicide note that made the original police team so suspicious? It had been revealed through the marks it left on Paula's April accounts, so it seemed to have been written a full 2 months before her apparent suicide in June. But just because a list starts in April, it doesn't mean it was written in April. The police should have read on. Paula wrote up the accounts up to and even beyond the date of her own death on June the 4th. If the accounts were all written up at the same time, then the lost suicide note doesn't have to have been written before April. It could simply have been written before Paula wrote her final set of accounts. Audrey Giles is a document analyst of international reputation. The view is taken that since the accounts begin with an entry on March the 27th, this suggests that the suicide letter must have been written on or before March the 27th. How safe is that assumption?
Well, it isn't safe at all, and as far as I can see from the papers that I've looked at, nobody actually seemed to have questioned whether the accounts were written commencing on March the 27th.
Why isn't it safe?
Well, because all you have is a list of entries here. There's no reason to suppose, even on this page, that the page wasn't written up in retrospect in May.
Could they even have been written in retrospect in June?
Well, again, I don't think that it's a question that was ever raised. It's not been looked at.
When a person writes a set of accounts and is found dead, it's reasonable to assume that there are money worries. And there were. Paula was the principal breadwinner, and when she had the baby, the tumble in the family income was going to be a major one. Paula and Eddie had remortgaged their house to pay for the refurbishments she had set her heart on. For all her moving up in the world, £1,000 was owed in poll tax, and the gas meter had been fiddled to register a fraudulent consumption. What's more, Paula acted as an agent for a catalogue company, and when she died, there was an outstanding balance owing of £2,500. Jackie King deals with people facing this kind of financial pressure every day.
If you look at the financial picture here, they're hanging on by the skin of their teeth at the moment, just about. I mean, there are things missing. There's not enough money for some of the things that are normal everyday things in this budget. And clearly, when you lose an income, and of course babies are very expensive, I would think that somebody like her, who obviously is very careful about her finances, would know that she was going to be in big trouble in the next few months, that they simply weren't going to be able to afford probably even to pay the mortgage.
Now, how aware is she of what's going on then?
I think she's very aware, because most people don't sit down in this very clear way and write down everything that's coming in and everything that's going out. I mean, if the clients that we were dealing with did that, well, we wouldn't have any clients. Here's a person who very carefully budgets all the time. And she would have known, absolutely, that she was heading into big trouble.
I mean, she's lost control.
She hasn't quite, but they're going to, and she could see that.
This case began as a suicide, a routine suicide. There were suicide letters. Paula believed that the husband she adored had betrayed her. The new baby might tie her forever to a man she could never trust again. Common sense and the facts, even when the facts have been mangled by such an inept police investigation, all point to suicide.
Medically speaking, there's nothing about this case which prevents this from being a suicide by hanging.
So it's a pity that the jury never got the chance to hear what Professor Bernard Knight had to say.
Vauxhall are offering free air conditioning as part of a £1,900 saving on the Vectra and Astra Arctics. And 0% finance. Interested?
How brave does a dog have to be to deserve new Pedigree Rancho, the long-lasting meaty treat? Not very. Remember, they're not just delicious. Chewing them's good for his gums, so there's always a good reason to give new Pedigree Rancho.
Did you pack the Continental plug adapter?
Yes, dear.
And what about my brown cords?
Yes.
And the mosquito repellent?
Oh, sir, we're only going shopping in Brussels for the day.
You don't love me anymore.
I think that couple are having a tip.
Oh no, I've forgotten the passports. Oh, it's okay. I think they're in my case. Everything's under control.
It's easy to take someone you love to Brussels.
Is it time, dear?
I think it is, dear. It takes up to 3 years for every block of Anchor slow matured cheddar to acquire its rather superior taste.
Will you be needing me for anything else, sir?
No, thank you, Jenkins. Anchor slow matured cheddar. A superior taste, well worth waiting for.
Love was made for me and you.
How clever does a dog have to be to deserve Pedigree Rusk, the delicious chew? Not very. Remember, it's not just delicious, its special shape helps get his teeth really clean, so there's always a good reason to give Pedigree Rusk.
Ironically, Walter had actually forgotten the passport. Thankfully, his wife had not, enabling them to spend an enjoyable days shopping in Belgium's capital.
So she said, all right, I wouldn't know what to put. And he said, it's all right, I'll tell you. Just write that you're having an affair and that the baby's not mine and you can't live with it any longer.
The case against Guilfoyle turns on the truth of the allegation that Paula's despairing letters were dictated by Eddie.
Unfortunately, the baby has come when I am at the lowest ever in my life. I don't know whether to bring it up myself or pack my job in, move away, and give someone the chance to adopt.
Everyone accepts this letter, written early in her pregnancy, is genuine, a reflection of a real despair. So what about the others?
I would like you to try and pick up the pieces with Sandra, as I know she really loves you. You deserve better than me.
There's the same sense of hopelessness in this letter, written 2 months before her death, as in the one everyone accepts as genuine, but the prosecution say it was dictated. In it, she confesses to having an affair and wishes Eddie good luck with Sandra. Would Paula dutifully take down such a damaging and false confession? Was Paula, already wounded and mistrustful, so loyal to her husband as to write him out a virtual license for adultery, for a project at work?
And a kiss.
There's no mention of suicide. So how does this fit the supposed master plan to get her to write suicide letters? The case on which her son was convicted was that he planned this. He planned this as a murder, had been planning it for months, had been laying the trail.
He hasn't got the brains, he's not clever enough.
He's not clever enough to do anything like that.
He hasn't got brains.
He really isn't. Don't get me wrong, he's quite all right. He hasn't got the brains to do anything like that.
He hasn't got the brains
He'd have to be a genius to work out how they said he's killed her.
And what about those messages he left for Paula? If he'd invented Paula's affair, what would she make of his notes expressing his upset about it?
Thank you for the letter you left me. At least I know the truth now. I'm not bitter and don't hate you. I don't think I will be able to cope in work today. I'm not looking forward to telling your mum and dad. So I'm going in. I will see Joyce and see if I can't come home.
He told me that his wife had said she was going to leave him and that the baby wasn't his. And he really was very distressed that day. So I sent him off home again.
And so when he said, my wife is leaving me and the baby isn't mine, you had no reason to think this was not true?
Absolutely no reason. And he believed that at the time.
He believed that
yes,
at the time?
I'm sure he believed. He believed what he was saying to me was right.
So his notes reflect things that actually happened, and they're a response to Paula's letters. How then can those letters be fantasy, written at his dictation?
I don't want to have this baby that I'm carrying.
Let's accept the prosecution case just for a moment. And let's imagine that Paula did write these letters at Eddie's dictation. Let's also imagine that she was genuinely concerned when she told her friends at work about the letters. But if she was so concerned about writing letters for Eddie, how do we explain how she permitted herself to be murdered by him? Would she have trusted Eddie to take her into the garage? Paula had told her friend in the canteen she was so worried about writing the notes to Eddie's dictation that she'd torn them up. So would she really have written out another one for him, the one which was found after her death? If she was worried, could she have been so dazzled by a husband she distrusted that she let him put a rope around her neck? Because if you believe Eddie Guilfoyle killed his wife, that or something just as unlikely is what he must have contrived. At trial, the jury weren't told about the worries Paula is said to have confided to her friends at work. There's a good reason for this, and that's because there's no way, with Paula dead, that you can test the truth of what she was saying, or the reason she might have been saying it. I believe that Paula did say, Eddie's getting me to write these letters. I believe that to be the case. I mean, what reason could there possibly be for her to say that?
Well, that's assuming...
I don't think they're making up those conversations.
Well, let's just add this to what you're saying then. If Paula has in fact gone into work at the beginning of April and said to the people in Champions, Eddie's got me writing letters, why doesn't Paula, in the following 8 weeks after that, go into work and say, These letters he's got me writing, this fictional letter about this baby not being his, Eddie really believes this, because he's writing me notes every night when I'm getting in from work, saying, why aren't you leaving? Why haven't you left? He really believes this fictitious homework he's given me to do.
The case went to appeal. The judges didn't test this hearsay evidence, yet they included it in their judgment as a warning to those who might take up Guilfoyle's case.
Lest public credence of the appellant's insistence that he is the victim of a miscarriage of justice based upon an insupportable and far-fetched theory conjured up by the Crown gains unmerited support.
It is not evidence. It is not evidence that it was true. It is not evidence that Eddie did make her write those letters. The mischief that was done in this case, in my view, is that having said, yes, this evidence is capable of being admissible, the court decided that they were not going to admit it, and therefore it was never tested. But they still treated it as though it was before the court. It had been admitted and was only capable of one interpretation.
Paula Guilfoyle's family and close friends will never believe that she committed suicide. She seemed so happy, so bubbly, so utterly excited about the impending birth of her first baby. Paula was the last person you'd expect to be suicidal. But we've found evidence, in fact, that throughout her pregnancy, Paula had been prone to morbid thoughts about her life and her future in Grafton Drive. In October, she wrote this to a friend.
At the moment, we are very busy. His dad is there every day as the money has run out to pay anyone, so his dad is doing it. I'm not very happy, but what can you say?
All I can tell you is that Paula was never right and was never the same person after they bought the house in Grafton Drive. She went back to live with her mum and dad, and the Paula that came back after that was never the same Paula as she'd been when she first got married to my brother.
By March, she was writing to her husband,
I just feel as if there's nothing down for us. We still argue. Maybe it'd be better with someone else. I try my hardest to be full of life at night, but I can't. Beginning to hate being pregnant.
Certainly the last occasion that I saw Paula, I found Paula to be extremely depressed. All she went on about was that she couldn't believe she was pregnant. She, at times, was totally cut off from the conversation we were having. She kept saying that she couldn't imagine herself with a baby. She couldn't bear the mess. She would have to make it eat in the garden. That she couldn't understand how people like us allow children to walk around eating biscuits and things on the furniture. She just knew she was not going to be able to cope with that.
and the evidence is that in the last days of her life, Paula had spoken to friends about the terrible impact of suicide.
Terrible to do that. Kill yourself and leave the people behind hurting.
The very day before she died, she'd talked about the brother-in-law of a friend of hers who had committed suicide by hanging.
And that innocent people are left to pick up the pieces.
She condemned the act, but did it strike some secret chord of her own despair?
Paula said, the truth never comes out, truth never comes out.
Suicide in pregnancy is rare, but it happens. There's a book devoted to it, and in it we discovered the only major survey ever conducted on the subject. Its author is Dr. Jack Weir. He found that the second highest incidence of suicide occurred, as with Paula, in the last weeks of pregnancy.
Physically, it's uncomfortable, painful sometimes. The woman is overpowered by destructive forces. Having been struggling to some extent with them throughout the pregnancy, but it's about to become a birth.
You've looked at a lot of genuine suicide letters, and for us, you've looked at these letters. So what's your assessment of these letters? False or genuine?
Genuine.
The case against the man is that he tricked her into believing that he was on some sort of a course.
Well, I think he would have been a very clever man. You do get the feel of a woman who's pregnant and liking it and hating it.
Other experts testify to the inner conflict many women feel as they approach the most intense experience of their lives.
Unfortunately, we're in a society that doesn't allow pregnant women to express their true feelings. Externally, it can look as though that the woman is absolutely fine and is coping well with the pregnancy and looking forward to the birth of the baby. Internally may match up, but quite often there's a different picture. Internally, the woman may feel that she is physically out of control because physically she's grown, the baby is grown, the baby begins to move with a life of its own. And her expectations of herself and her life begins to change as well, and she's out of control with that. Somehow there's a shame attached to not matching up to the happiness of it, you know, the expectation of a wonderful baby and a wonderful life to come. To feel gloomy or in fear of that is taboo and is very frequently not talked about.
Even so, one would think that if a woman brought a baby that close to life, just weeks away, that she would have the baby first and then do away with herself.
No, she wouldn't want to leave the baby to the cruel world that she's wanting to leave.
There was another long shadow over Paula's life. 16 years ago, a young man raped and strangled a girl and threatened suicide. 3 days earlier, the young Paula had broken off her engagement to him. None of this evidence was heard at Guilfoyle's trial or his appeal, nor was crucial medical evidence which could have shed bright and dispassionate light into a case of shadows and prejudice. At trial, the Crown said that a second autopsy had revealed that there were 2 small but significant scratches on Paula's neck.
My view is that those scratch marks on the right side of the neck are almost certainly fingernail marks, and almost certainly, but not absolutely certain, caused by the deceased.
And Dr. Burns went on to say that he'd never seen such scratches in a genuine suicide. Professor Bernard Knight is the most famous forensic pathologist in the world. Through his grim detective work in the cellars and burial pits of Cromwell Street, the case against Rosemary West was literally pieced together through the remains of her victims. Knight was puzzled by the vital evidence Dr. Burns gave about those 2 small scratches.
I just can't understand that, because I've seen them. I've spoken since to many other colleagues who've seen them. Some colleagues have actually had fingers trapped underneath suicidal ropes. I mean, it just happens. I can't understand why you should say it doesn't happen. It's well known.
Others say, as I'm sure you know, that these sort of small scratches on the neck are really quite common in suicides by hanging.
Well, I don't know anybody who says they're common. I know colleagues of mine have had cases, and it's well documented that you can get fingernail marks in genuine suicide.
Oh, it's well documented that you can?
I accept that it is, yes. I accept that it is well documented wherever that you can get genuine fingernail scratches on the neck of somebody who's hanged themselves. Yes, I accept that. All I'm saying is that I have no experience of that in 30-odd years. None of my many cases have shown what remotely look like fingernail marks on the neck.
I've often seen similar marks in people who undoubtedly have committed suicide by hanging. It's a very common thing, suicidal hanging. And they almost reflexly may grab at the rope at the moment of suspension. And this is recorded in the textbooks. They could have been artifacts, in other words, just produced post-mortem. Bodies often get slight damage after a first autopsy. There's a lot of movement of the body and repair of the first autopsy incisions, so they could have been artifacts.
Never, ever, ever, in all the years, in all the many second autopsies I've done, allowing for, as you say, the knocks that bodies might take, I have never, ever seen marks resembling scratches on the neck.
But how many second post-mortems, Dr. Burns, have you done on a victim who died by hanging?
I can't offhand, in fact, recall having done a second autopsy on a hanging victim.
So it's possible that those marks might have developed in the course of the removal of the noose?
I think it's unlikely, because possible, but unlikely.
Murder or suicide? What does the medical evidence say?
Overwhelmingly a suicide. The only possibility is that this lady voluntarily let herself be hanged, which seems extraordinary to me.
Bernard Knight was not called to give his evidence before the jury at Liverpool Crown Court. Neither was his evidence heard by the appeal court.
I think the last 4 or 5 appeals, times that I've been to the appeal court, the appeal judges have refused to hear my evidence on the grounds that it could have been given at the original trial. So I go along there and sit around for a day and then go home. No one takes the evidence.
We went to court with one of the world's leading pathologists who said it wasn't murder. And we weren't allowed to call him. And we had witnesses who said that at the time the Crown was saying he murdered her, she was still alive. So we had a very strong appeal. And I don't think that the court objectively considered the strength of the appeal. I felt 2 or 3 years ago that things were changing for the better. I think in the early 90s, after the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4, Stefan Kishko's case, that the Court of Appeal appeared to accept that they couldn't deal with appeals as they had done in the past. In other words, trying to sustain the unsustainable. I fear that the Guildford case represents a very clear indication by the Court of Appeal that things have now swung back, and that the court now take the view that the most effective way of maintaining public confidence in the criminal process is by sustaining convictions brought in by a jury.
And that programme replaced the advertised trial and error.